a collection of Let's Not Meet stories from Reddit. All of these stories are true and can be found at Reddit Let's Not Meet. I didn't write any of these stories. All credit goes to the people on Reddit who wrote them. Please subscribe, like, comment, and shares. Story 1. Stranger Under the Bed. I am 22 and this incident happened a year and a half ago. I had just moved into my first apartment and was in the process of moving in. The door that led into my apartment locks itself automatically when closed. So, I was going to the entrance of the apartment complex to get my mail while talking on the phone with my boyfriend. I returned to my apartment and sat on the bed while opening the mail while using the phone. I dropped the phone on the floor and it landed under the bed, so I had to lie on the floor and stretch for it. I saw something that caught my eye. There was someone under my bed. My eyes widened and I choked the urge to scream. The person under my bed was lying still with his back towards me and his head to his chest, so I couldn't see his face. And he didn't see me. Trying to be rational while so many thoughts rushed through my head, I picked up the phone, said, "Sorry, I dropped my phone. I'm just gonna take a shower and call you back." The bathroom is right by my bed, so I hastily walked in, quietly locked the door, turned the shower on, jumped out my window, my apartment is on the first floor, and called the police. They told me to wait nearby, but to go to across the street and see if anyone comes out the door to the apartment complex. This was during summer and it was still light out. I placed myself across the street, hiding behind a car while watching my open bathroom window and the entry door. I called my boyfriend and he came to me just before the police. I gave them my keys and they went inside. Only moments later, 2 cops came out holding a thin and tired-looking man. His eyes looked crazy, but he didn't try to get away. The policeman that had stood beside me and comforted me while the police searched through my house, I was a mess, shivering and crying, told me that the man stood outside my bathroom door with one of my kitchen knives waiting for me to come out. This man had somehow crept in my entry door while I was getting my mail and hid under the bed. The man that was trying to hurt me turned out to be a homeless person and was placed in a mental hospital. My boyfriend moved in with me the very next day. So crazy homeless man, let's not meet again. Story 2. The Screaming Man with a Rifle. Years ago I went with my best friend to a lawn party at another friend's place. This person lived very close to my grandfather, a person I don't see very often, so I wanted to surprise him with a nice visit. They lived in an area with big fields and not so many roads, which resulted in the houses being far apart, but still close if you just skipped over the fields instead of taking the roads. My grandfather and my friend lived across a huge field from each other, and in the middle of this field, a guy in his mid-40s lived in this old ruin of a house. I knew him from stories from my grandfather, where he had told me that this guy is a crazy guy. He had earlier been in jail for killing his wife, and stories go on and on about this man. Back to the part about I wanted to surprise my grandfather, so I decided together with my friend that we should try and skip over the field, since taking the roads would lead to a 3 kilometers walk rather than a 400 walk. We got ready. Even though we knew we would have to walk closely past this man's house, we decided to do it anyways. On our way there, everything went well. It seemed like he wasn't home. We didn't have to deal with his craziness anyways. Well, that all changed on the way back. On our way back, we got past his house and were now standing a quarter of the way between my friend's house and the guy's house, when we started hearing banging and screaming, which all in all made my heart sink into my stomach. After a couple seconds we could now hear was loudly and angrily being yelled, and turned around. The man was now out of his house, standing a bit into the field, and yelling, "If I ever see you again crossing past my house, I'll shoot you dead like a cow." And he literally yells on and on. I was at this point around 16, so I was not prepared at how to deal with him, so I just yelled that I was very sorry, which he really did not care about, and kept yelling and screaming and kinda angrily shaking his rifle into the air. At this point, my friend and I had been slowly but surely moving towards my friend's house, and after 10 of the most devastating minutes of my life, we got into our friend's house. Story 3. A hooded guy followed me with a knife. A little backstory about myself. I'm 15, I like to watch a lot of horror movies, and that developed kind of a paranoia for me, which is bad because if I'm out during nighttime without music to listen to, I would panic. I decided to go and grab some pizza because there wasn't anything made for dinner, and I'm home alone for the week. The store isn't that far away, but it's not that close either. I put on my headphones and I start listening to music. I tried to not pay attention to the darkness around me because I could feel I was starting to panic a little bit. I bought my pizza and went back to the path I came from, which was quite dark, and then all of a sudden a girl ran past me crying, looking really scared, and I started worrying more. When I looked into the direction she was running from, I saw a hooded guy with a knife. My heart instantly felt like it stopped, and I started running the other direction, because as I could see, he wasn't interested in the girl anymore, he was interested in me. So I ran for like a minute to another path which isn't dark, and when I went there everything was good, and I tried to calm myself as quickly as possible. As I was close to my home, I saw him come up around the corner, and God, I never opened my door faster. Luckily he didn't see me go in my building. So I was thinking to myself, what if the girl didn't run in the direction I was coming from? That thought terrifies me the most. Creepy follower with a knife, let's not meet again. Story 4. The man at my front door. My parents built a house in the country when I was a kid. We were surrounded by 25 acres of trees on one side, and cornfields on every other side. Our road was a single lane, unlit. The driveway had motion sensor lights, but animals were always setting those off, so I learned to ignore them. One night, when I was probably 9 years old, I was lying on the living room floor watching TV. My parents were asleep up on the second floor. They didn't care that I was up since summer break was underway. Anyway, I was lying there in the dark, on our emerald green 90s carpet, watching TV, and around 11 the light from the front steps suddenly went out. I whipped my head around and saw some guy crouched down on the front porch looking through the window next to the door. He had choppy dark hair and was wearing a white t-shirt. I felt him make eye contact with me. Then he jumped up and started rattling the door knob, which was unlocked. Luckily, the deadbolt was turned. I really do mean that it was lucky because no one I've ever lived with has cared about locking doors. I was probably the one who turned the deadbolt that night. I finally got up the nerve to run to the steps leading upstairs. They were right by the front door. He started banging on the door at that point. I scrambled upstairs and launched myself at my dad. Dad ran downstairs and managed to spot the guy running across our front yard toward one of the cornfields. Keep in mind the corn was tall since it was summertime. My dad then went outside with his rifle and our dog to make sure he was gone. Even little me thought that was stupid, but he didn't run into the creep. We never saw the guy again. Oh, and the light went out because he unscrewed the bulb. When I look back on it, I wonder what his goal was. He had to have seen me from the light of the TV, and he kept going after he knew I saw him. Was he trying to kidnap me? Was he a spectacularly crappy burglar? Was he a killer? Was he just some random guy on drugs? Some combination of the above? Story 5. I couldn't see his face. So this happened a few years back to me, and it has been one of the creepiest and most disturbing things that I can remember. I used to live in a small house in the outskirts of a Mexican town called Durango. Not much to say about it. It was the worst place to live and was dangerous. I guess my mother really wanted to live far from my grandmother. What I recall about this place was a small hole or skylight next to my room that had 2 windows, one for my room and the other was for my mom's room. It was dirty and debris was laying on the floor. I remember seeing rats and other animals in that place. So my bed was at the center of the room, and next to the big window I had my wear box. All my clothes were in there and a few toys. I was little at the time, maybe 7 years old, and I was going to the school, so we had to wake up early in the morning in order to shower, eat, and all of that. Regardless of the little time we had to get to the bus, my mom took like an hour to put on her makeup, dress, and all of that. She did all of that in her room, and I guess she never foreshadowed what was going to happen during the week that a big part of my life changed. It was around 6 in the morning and I was putting on my clothes when I feel something isn't right about the place. I think it would have been better if I had only ignored it, but for some reason I looked in the skylight and I saw a shadow. I stared at it, and I noticed a squatted man looking towards my mother's room. My heart started pounding hard, and maybe because of the moment, but I couldn't see the guy's face at all. I started walking to my mom's room to tell her this. I remember her wearing underwear, and it was uncomfortable because I saw the man. So I just looked at her in the eyes and pointed to the skylight. She walked to it, and I think she saw the man because she didn't say anything, like me. I really don't remember what happened next, but I'm sure my mom closed the window's shadows and started putting on her clothes as fast as she could. We didn't own guns and my mom was alone. My dad left when I was like 3, so she called the neighbor who was my uncle and he goes out to check. There was a man and he was a nasty sob because talking about him later my mom told me that he was masturbating to her. But that's not even the worst part. A week later we were with my grandparents living until we found another place when my uncle calls her telling and someone broke into our home. She was on tears. Usually she could withstand anything, but she was teared apart by that. We went to check the place, and whoever entered the house didn't took anything too expensive, some jewelry and money, but the thing that made everything creepy was that my mom's underwear and pants were all in the bed spread around. My mom used to be a model, so she kept some photos around in folders or whatever, and the guy found them and took some of them. Time passed on and my mom threw away her clothes and all of her photos, just keeping the ones that he didn't touch. We moved to my grandparents' house and later she left Mexico and came here with me to start a new life. I think great part of it was because of this, unfortunately. Before we did this I heard rumors that the guy had been caught and he was a sex offender and a drug addict. We were lucky to have someone we knew next because I cannot imagine how this would have ended up, or if I could tell this at all. Story 6. Charge your phone and do not hike alone. I don't really know how to start this, so I'll just jump straight into it. I will try to keep it as short as possible, but also want to make sure what I'm saying is clear as well. I'll answer any questions in the comments if anything is left unclear. I am a photographer and there is a nature preserve maybe 2 or 3 miles from my house. I don't live in the best of areas, so it is one of the few places I could go within walking distance to get a decent shot when I need one to post for my social media BS. Being maybe 19 at the time, I was fortunate enough to have my mother to drop me off on this occasion. The plan was for her to show up a little over an hour later to pick me back up, to save me the multiple-mile trek back to our little home. Unfortunately, that isn't how things panned out. Just as we pulled up, another car did as well just a few seconds later. My mother was a little suspicious because it isn't a very popular destination, but mothers always worry, so I ensured her that I would be fine and allowed her to head back to do the things she needed to do at home. There are 3 different ways you can go initially. A path that leads left, right, and one up the middle. They all kind of loop back around to that same spot, but it is a solid mile before it does so. I opted to take the middle trail as it is the most scenic, but paused near the entrance as I was still adjusting my equipment and taking some test shots before moving deeper where I might potentially see wildlife or something worthwhile. This is when the man who pulled up after I did came in and proceeded up the center trail as well. I continued fidgeting with my equipment even after having it properly adjusted as I waited for him to pass me, and as he did, he attempted to talk to me. Something along the lines of, "Getting good photos?" which any photographer will get when they are out shooting. I responded with something simple and kind, but also in a dismissive tone because I had no interest in continuing to converse with him. Something about him made me incredibly uncomfortable. So uncomfortable, in fact, that I decided to stay in that initial entrance area to photograph some boring-ass plants even after he disappeared around the bend and out of my line of sight. I'm so thankful that I did that, because within 5 minutes he somehow managed to complete the full loop and end up back behind me. The loop takes me at least a solid 15 minutes to get through even when I'm in a hurry. He either busted ass to circle back around me or took a shortcut to do so. Noticing I was still by the entrance, he passed me again, walking through the exact same way he'd just been. This is when I knew there was absolutely something going on. I stood there and watched as he walked the exact same path, even down and around the bend out of my sight. I continued watching in the distance down at the bend where I lost sight of him for a few seconds, and what do I see? Him peeking around the corner to see me. Once he noticed I saw, he disappeared again. This is when I simply said, "Fuck this shit," and left. As soon as I exited the preserve, I took off in a full sprint, hoping I could put some distance between the two of us. Just as I was about to turn down a side street, I turned back to see him exiting the preserve and entering his vehicle. My phone was dead. I never charged the damn thing, and I had absolutely no way to contact anyone. I was at the point where I contemplated running up to someone's house and asking them to help or call someone for me, but I was worried I would seem like the crazy person. I turned the corner, and once again we no longer had sight of each other. I was out of breath and unable to keep running. I just began to pray that he was no longer going to be following me. Maybe this was all just some weird coincidence, right? Apparently, prayer doesn't work, because within a few moments he was back in sight, turning the corner and beginning to approach on the same street that I was now on. My mind was racing with all of the possibilities of what he was going to try to do, but without much time I just decided that I wasn't going to give him the opportunity to do anything. I continued walking until he literally pulled up within feet of me and his window began rolling down. I threw my bag down onto the ground next to me, turned in his direction with balled fists, and shouted with the full power of my lungs, "I will kill you if you don't get the fuck away from me." The angry little scowl he had on his face this entire time faded and began to more resemble a deer in headlights. He didn't know what to do. He then nervously uttered, "I have rights," before speeding off to never be seen by me again. I then had to complete the walk to my home, constantly looking over my shoulder and hoping he didn't make another approach. I'm just glad to have made all of the decisions I made that day, because I genuinely have no idea what would have happened on that day if I didn't. I do not know if this story will come across as horrifying as it was in person, but if it doesn't, it is simply a failure of my writing ability. Story 7. Loony Guy at the Gym. My background: military, moved here 2 years ago. So, I've been going to the local 24HR Fitness ever since I got stationed here. For these 2 years I've seen this guy Brand that seemed pretty cool. I've played one-on-one basketball with him. He has told me about his crazy ex-wife, blah blah. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. So normal to me, that I invited him over on July 3rd to have enchiladas with my family. Again, nothing out of the ordinary here. Last Friday, I am playing basketball with my wife. This is a tradition we have after every workout. Well, Brand comes up from my right side and smacks the ball out of my hand. He has done this before, so I didn't think much about it, but today seemed different. He seemed more aggressive. He apologizes for interrupting our game and goes to play ball on the other side of the court. I get to my car and there are 4 text messages from him. "What's your problem, homie? You at the gym? You can't fuck up what's already fucked up. No big deal. I'll catch up with you." The thing is, he sent me these text messages 30 minutes before I saw him in the gym. So I respond with, "What are you talking about?" No reply. Then, the next day at 7 a.m. he texts me and my wife's co-worker Trey, who also goes to the gym. So a group chat, which is as follows. Video link to the song Future Mask Off, steal from me too. Moda fucking faggots wanted my attention. Now they got it. Video link to the song Eminem Go to Sleep. The lyrics though, word for word. I'm obsessed now. So my buddy Trey and I are confused. I texted Trey to ask what the hell this dude is talking about. My buddy Trey texted back in the group chat. What are you talking about, bro? So 5 hours later the dude replies with, I forgot. My thoughts are sporadic like an addict. Oh, now I remember. I love you, man. For real, Thursday night around 8:30 this cat got my keys and water out of my gym bag and stole $1,000 and a pistol from my car. Jim released video to police but nobody knows what his name is. I thought I've seen him with Trey but I don't know Trey's last name. I just gave the cops Trey's first name and phone number. So if you get a call you know what it's about. They are just trying to identify him so it don't happen to someone else. They didn't see him getting in my car, just into my gym bag in the gym. Then putting my water back 5 minutes later. It's strange they stole my water. Cops are scratching their head. So I filed a police report for $1,000 and a missing pistol and a half-gallon of reverse osmosis water. SMH can't have shit. You think you have friends until the cops come asking questions. You gonna see how many friends you have. They all snitch because why? Save their own ass. El Mayo, I'm one, see you Monday night at 6. So at this point I start putting shit together. He was aggressive at the gym and texting me because he thinks I took his shit. I texted him back saying if I could help in any way I would. And he said, thanks bro. I then called him because I wanted to clear my name and Trey's name. But 20 seconds into the conversation I could tell the dude was not right in the head. On the phone, he said he got his cocaine, money, and guns stolen out of his gym bag. He said that he knows I, Trey, and my wife plotted against him to rob him. He says I invited him over to plot against him. He said I made a big mistake by inviting him over and showing him where I live. I asked what that meant exactly, and he said, I got guns, if the cops don't handle this I will handle this. I said, are you going to try and hurt my family? And he said he knew where I lived. I explained to him that I am in the military, and that I don't get involved in illegal shit like that, and neither does my wife or Trey, who are also in the military. We have clearances. He said, I know you did it. He mentioned that he was a diagnosed schizophrenic who is always high on drugs. That people know not to fuck with him. He said the gym won't release the footage to him, only the cops. At that point I ended the conversation because I knew I could not reason with someone who is unreasonable. It also occurred to me that if the gym didn't release the footage to him, he has no idea who took his shit and is assuming. So I called Trey immediately and let him know to watch his back at the gym. That this dude is a nut job and he thinks we plotted against him. Paranoid loony. Yesterday around 9:04 p.m. I got a text from him again. Are you and your bitch going out tonight? I'm buying drinks all night. So I replied saying, that's my wife, not my bitch. Have a good night. Then he replied, she a fucking hoe. Are you mad? I bet she gives good sloppy head. Am I right? I think he meant, right. At this point I am shaking, because I am so mad at this guy for saying these things about my wife. But I did not reply. Then about 30 minutes later he sent me video link to Mariah Carey Obsessed. I did not reply. Now I am at a friend's house watching last night's UFC match. As soon as I get home I call the local police to have an officer sent to my house. I explained all of this stuff to the officer, and the officer advised to not go to that gym anymore and to not engage with the individual. He asked if I have a weapon at home and I said I do, and he said good, you have the right to defend yourself. I also have a huge German Shepherd. So today at 2:53 p.m. he sends a group text again to me and T. Meme of O.J. Simpson smiling with the caption, when you know you did it but they couldn't find you guilty. I guess John, me, and I aren't friends anymore, got all sensitive over a hoe. Done went soft on us shit. I guess this means next time I see you we are throwing hands? Fighting, I guess, or are you cool with me calling your bitch a hoe? I love you, John. Opinions on fags or buys in the military? Military? Line them up like Columbine. See if I get away with it now. Just so you two know, I'm far from confused or forgetful. I love you, brothers. I owe you 1. Or should I say 5? I feel like I should pay you for the mollies. Or bath salts, or hook me up with, just let me know how much? My bank account is the only thing overdosing over here. While he was sending that string of texts, me, my wife, and Trey were at the gym canceling our memberships for fear or our lives. The gym also stated that they would suspend Brand's membership. I am not going to block the guy's number because I want any evidence I can use against him in the event something happens to my vehicle, my house, or my family. Also, if you notice at the end of the last string of texts, he is implying that we now sold him drugs. I have turned on my motion detector to record when I am not home. I have also shown my wife how to arm and use my weapon. I am glad that me and my wife are moving to Germany soon, but it's not soon enough. I fear for the safety of my wife when I am not home. I am not going to engage the guy because I don't want to give him any more ammo for the crazy scenario in his head. Ever seen the movie A Beautiful Mind? Honestly, at this point, I am not even sure if anything was stolen from him. I don't really hang out with civilians for the lifestyle differences, and the one time I did, look what happened. Now, I am not saying civilians are bad at all, but I carry caution even higher than before. Anyway, thanks for reading, stay safe and keep to yourself at the gym. Update 9 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. The dude just found me on Facebook. Now I have his last name. I sent the Facebook post to the police officer I spoke with earlier along with a Facebook profile picture. The guy Brand sent me a message also that said, "Hey handsome. Cute picture. You should be a model." I blocked him and had my wife block him. Now he knows our last names. What next? Update 10 p.m. Mountain Standard Time looks at pics of local apartments on Google. Pretty easy to find where he lives. About 15 minutes down the highway from Maine. I got enough information on him now that if something happens I can notify the authorities of his approximate location. Story 8. To this day I will not go into town at night. This is going to be very short, but it really bothered me. Like, I still have a little bit of trouble sleeping at night because of this. So I was with some friends, David, John, Alan, and Jack, and we were celebrating Jack's birthday. Now, while I personally don't smoke weed, my friend Jack is a huge pothead. We went to a little hangout/party thing and everybody but me got shit-faced while we were there. Jack spent about $100 on weed that night. It was like his little birthday gift to himself, and we were staying the night at David's house. The little party thing was happening at someone's house. I don't know their name, I've never met them, and we left to go back to David's house around 2:45 a.m. We got to David's house and everyone decided that they were hungry, but there wasn't anything to eat at David's house. Well, David lives in the middle of the city, and his house is right across the street from a Waffle House. So, we walked to Waffle House to get some food. They're open all the time. While we were there, this guy came in asking if anybody had any money to give him. He looked just like a stereotypical old homeless guy. Well, none of us did because David's older brother let us use his credit card to buy our food, so nobody brought any cash with us. The man went to a booth on the other side of the room and just sat down and stared at us for the rest of the time we were there. When we walked out, he followed us out. We ended up running when we were about halfway to David's house because it really did freak us out. We got inside and slammed the door, locking it as we did so. I ran throughout the house checking all of the doors and windows to make sure they were all locked, and I walked back to where all my friends were. Everyone was crowded around a window looking outside, and I remember asking Jack what was going on, but he was so high he couldn't even talk. So I just kind of shoved my way through to look out of the window, and this guy had followed us all the way from the Waffle House to David's house. He was just standing on the sidewalk, staring at the house. That dude stood there till the morning. The worst part was that we couldn't call the cops because everyone smelt like weed and we weren't about to risk it. And we decided it wouldn't be hard to run to get the pistol David's mom has because David lives in a pretty small house. So we just sat there and watched that guy until the morning when he finally left. I've never seen him since and I hope it stays that way. That experience just freaked me out a lot, and now I don't like going into town at night. Story 9. Always keep your doors closed and your blinds shut. I'm new at this, so I'll start it simple. I was around 16 years old when this happened to me. It was just me and my dad at our house, and since he was a businessman that traveled frequently, I was left home alone quite often. First of all, I'm going to try to do my best to describe to you the layout of my house so you can better understand my situation. My house is pretty small since it is just my father, my dog, and me living in it. There's a long hallway full of full-sized windows separating my dad's room and mine. Our dog loved to look out the windows, so we always kept them open enough for her to look out. I'm the last room at the end of the hallway. In between the two rooms is my bathroom and a spare room. All the rest is irrelevant. Let's get to it. It was around 11 p.m. when the worst night of my life began. My dad was passed out in bed after a long day, and I was mindlessly dancing around my house getting ready for bed. I hopped in my shower, not knowing what was coming ahead. And of course, like a cringe-worthy horror movie, my dog starts aggressively barking up a storm. With my excessive knowledge of how it turns out for the girl in the movies, I go out and explore. I head to my room to throw some clothes on while my dog is still shitting a brick. Months before, I'm not sure how I managed to break my door handle, but you don't have to twist the knob to open it, all it needs is a small push. Scared shitless, I barely managed to put a shirt on when my dog opened the door. I looked to see her enter my room, while in the midst of barking, and that's when I saw it. There's only one window that has vision to the opening of my room. And in the corner of it, I saw a face. A face so seemingly sinister that I can still see it years after. It was dark, so I took a second to comprehend what I just saw, but when I finally realized it, I screamed. My dad owns lots of guns, so when he heard me scream bloody murder, he ran out with a pistol. He asked me what happened and could barely mutter what I saw. He ran outside to see if the man with the terrifying face was still near. We stood out there for a minute scanning the area. A man was casually strolling towards us from the opposite direction from about 100 yards away. I knew it was him. I got that feeling in my stomach that you can't mistake. It was like he was trying to cover up that he was there by coming from a different direction. That bastard didn't fool me. You better stay the fuck away from my daughter. You see what I have here? You know what this does? Holding up his gun, I could have sworn my dad was going to shoot. The man brushed these threats off easily. Fuck off, old man, he said. My dad and I went back inside. He went back to bed like nothing had happened, but I could not sleep a wink. I kept thinking he was going to come back and hurt me because of the threats to him. We called the cops the next morning, and they came and scoped out our house. He looked around the house trying to calm me down, but I was still pretty shaken up. He went to the front yard, and that's when he saw it. In front of the windows in the long hallway there were small bushes, nothing much. The cop, from outside, went to the window that had view of my room, and there it was. If he tried to tell me the news without making me more upset, he failed. There were indents in the dirt right in front of the window. That meant he knew where he needed to look for you, and it seems as if he had come here more than once because of the broken pieces of bush and the divots in the ground. Turns out he was the nephew of my old neighbor, and he had been staying there for months. Never arrested, never got in trouble, probably barely got a slap on the wrists. But at least he was gone now. How long had he been watching me? I'll never know. All I know is I keep my doors shut, and I never keep the blinds open. So, creepy nephew that had watched me for who knows how long, let's not meet again. Story 10. Beware of small towns in Florida. This is a long time ago, late 90s. When I was 19, I moved from Oregon to Florida to be with my boyfriend at the time. Don't ever do that. I was thinking, white sand beaches and Mickey Mouse, but instead got the swamp, bugs and dirt roads. It was a huge shock to the system. We lived in this dinky little town called Hawthorne, just outside of Gainesville. Don't ever go there. Very small, 1 stoplight and 4 stores. Dollar General, Steve's Market, Eckerd's Pharmacy and Sonny's Barbecue. Whoopee. Anyway, I got a job at the now defunct Eckerd's in the middle of town. It was next to the grocery store, so everyone shopped there. After about 3 months or so working there, I walked in to start my shift one day when the manager pulled me into his office. Laid out on his desk was about 30 to 40 open letters, all addressed by hand. To me. Do you know this person? My manager asked. No. Read one. So I picked the cheerful yellow one. Inside were 2 handwritten letters and a magazine cut. Out of a woman with long blonde hair. Just like me. As the Eckerd manager watched on, I read the letter. I skipped around a lot out of confusion, desperately trying to find out why I'm in this room. From what I read, it was mostly someone imagining what spending time with me would be like. A lot of it was sexual in nature. There were descriptions and comments about my hair, washing it, smelling it, and something about the moonlight. A few sentences were highlighted, others were underlined. My first thought was, am I getting fired? Do you know this David Elrod? Hair. I said yes, I think so. The tall, lanky guy with thick glasses and frizzy dark blonde hair. The regular who comes in a couple times a week to pick up Diet Coke and medication for his mom. Late 20s and obviously socially or mentally challenged. On rare occasions, he would make small talk as I rang up his soda. Once or twice, he would linger at my register or stare at me, but I figured he was just trying to adjust his eyes or had poor social cues. Harmless, compared to some of the other people I had met in Florida, so I didn't pay him any mind. Until that day in the Eckerd's office. I knew he wrote the letters because of a strange encounter 2 weeks earlier. While working, he came up behind me and caressed my hair. I had to remove it from his hands and he apologized. Weird. No harm, I went back to work. After telling my manager this, he informed me that the customer was going to be banned from the store, and I was being sent home while they worked out the details. What details? Confused, I walked out of the store and drove home. Strange. 2 hours after I got home from my non-shift at work, there's a knock on my door. I look out the window and see what resembles a SWAT team. What the fuck? I saw men in tactical gear with large weapons, 2 men dressed in suits, and several uniformed cops. In what seemed like slow motion at the time, I opened the door. A female officer holds up a few oddly familiar letters. Can we come in and talk to you about these? Realizing everyone in town has read the letters, I wanted to pass the fuck out. I don't even know the guy. We have a seat on my couch, and she begins to speak. Out of the corner of my eye, I see my boyfriend shooting me dirty looks from the bedroom. The female officer mentions getting the letters from Eckerd's and attempting to issue a trespassing notice. They wanted to speak to him directly, she says, because her whole department is aware of David. The officers confronted him at his residence and attempted to evoke the trespassing notice from Eckerd's store. Apparently, he was not happy about this. He insisted for over 45 minutes how this was all a big mistake and I wanted to talk to him. He was so combative and persistent, they decided to pursue stalking charges. Stalking charges? She continues. You need to be aware that David killed and partially dismembered his mother when he was 12 years old. He was released from a juvenile psychiatric facility less than 4 years ago. Diet Coke. We found disturbing materials at his home. She continued. We believe he's been stalking you. My mind kept wandering. It's my mom's favorite drink. David was arrested the next day for stalking after he was found in the Eckerd's parking lot, but the last official word was he went back to the psychiatric hospital, at least temporarily. I didn't have the chance to read the letters in full before they were entered into some vault of evidence, nor did they explain what they found at his house, so I never had the complete picture of what was happening. My boyfriend at the time was a huge dick about the whole thing, so I moved back to Oregon a week later. Besides, who wants to hang around when Norman Bates is fixated on you? Story 11. Crazy neighbor tried to break into my house. Okay, so I've contemplated posting this for a little while. It happened a good few years ago, back in my early teens. To give a bit of background, the street I grew up on was very suburban, and as a child, I was often allowed to stay out late because the area was safe and everybody knew everybody. Eventually, this middle-aged guy moved onto our street. He was nice enough, but he rarely interacted with anyone on the street. My friend knew his family and had disclosed to me that he had a wife and children, but in the year or so that he had lived on the street, I'd never seen anyone visit/move in with him. It was obvious he lived by himself. So one night, I'm awoken by the sound of the doorbell ringing repeatedly and loud banging against the front door. I tried to go downstairs to see what was going, but my older sister appears on the stairs and immediately tells me stay upstairs. I asked her why, and she doesn't tell me. Naturally, I was confused and curious, so I peered downstairs and saw my mother pressing her weight against the front door. The door was locked and bolted, but she still leaned against it. I look out the window to see my neighbor angrily smashing his fists against the door while threatening to kill us. I was majorly freaked out by this, and I began asking my sister more questions. She tells me they've called the police and Dad was on his way home. My father often worked night shifts. Eventually, my dad arrived and a few of the others' neighbors had come out to see what was going on. They managed to get him away from the front door, and police eventually arrived and took him. Apparently, the next day he had no recollection of what had occurred, and he had told the police officer to pass on his apology to us. As it turned out, he'd gotten insanely drunk the night before and forgotten that he'd turned his kitchen light on. He then assumed that because he couldn't remember turning the lights on, that somebody had snuck into his house and turned them on, and it must have been one of us. My mother was absolutely seething, and rightly so. He may have sobered up the next day, but what would have happened if he had gotten in? What would he have done then? I personally believe he was on more than just booze that night, but what do I know? Thankfully, he moved away a few weeks later. Dear creepy neighbor, let's not meet again. Story 12. He will never let me go. I used to be in a bad marriage. I made excuses because my ex didn't physically hit me. When I finally was fed up and left him, I moved into a house with my long-term best friend. My ex started stalking me and tracking me through Facebook. He knew about texts that were in my phone that he had no way to have read unless he had some kind of spying app. He knew where I was, how long it took me to get home from work, who I had spoke with during my day. It was early one morning. The sun was coming up and the light through my window was enough to disturb my sleep. I rolled over in bed and extended my arm. That's when I felt it, someone else's arm. I jumped out of bed screaming an unnatural scream, almost hyperventilating. There lay my ex, wide awake. He calmly looked up at me and coldly said, "I missed you." Running through my panicked mind was the thought that he was going to end my life. He would never let me leave. I screamed, "You can't do this! It's creepy." He got up and replied, "What? Can I come see my wife?" I could tell right then that he didn't love me. He felt he owned me. I spent what felt like an eternity trying to calm down and placate him enough to get him out of my house. I should have called the police, but I had been mentally abused for 5 years and I was terrified to call the police on him. I stopped staying at my house after that. I stayed the night with any friend that would host me. It's been over 2 years and I am still trying to legally divorce him. He just won't let me go. Story 13. Why I avoid my childhood best friend. After the events that took place when I was 8 years old, things went back to normal for my friends and I. The guy who had tormented us was gone, and we were pretty much safe again. This continued until we finished primary school. When this happened, we didn't see each other very much, apart from a few who went to the same school as me. Up until that point, my best friend was Jake. He ended up going to a different school, so we only saw each other twice since we finished school. When we were both 13, we had moved on and weren't friends anymore. So, one day when I was 13 or 14, I met up with an old friend. His name was Ethan. He had also been friends with Jake. When we met up, we decided to go to a large park that was located between our houses. We went on the swings for a while, but left after a girl started shouting at us. We walked to the basketball court close to the exit as we made our way towards Ethan's house. This area was surrounded by thick bushes and trees that are easy to hide in, so we had no idea what was about to happen. We weren't paying much attention to our surroundings as we had a lot to catch up on. We didn't notice a group of masked people dressed completely in black approaching us until it was too late. We were surrounded, and we saw that they were all armed with kitchen knives. There was 6 or 7 of them surrounding us when one of them spoke. He demanded all of our money and our phones. He said that they would kill us if we refused or tried anything. His voice sounded familiar, and when I got a better look at him, I realized that it was Jake. I don't think he recognized me because he pointed his knife right at me and demanded our stuff again. At this point, Ethan had also realized who it was. Simultaneously, we both told him who we were. He looked at us for a second, and then he pulled his mask off and greeted us. He told me that I hadn't changed much before telling us that we were lucky and to get out of there. We started to walk away, and as we reached the exit, we turned and saw them running into the bushes. Freaked out, we ran to Ethan's house and didn't leave for a few hours. When it came time for me to leave, I ran straight home, avoiding the park. I saw him again after that, but I always avoided him. I almost never went out on my own again for the next few years. So, my childhood best friend, who was like a brother to me, almost mugged me. If he hadn't realized who we were, things could have been very different. The people with him seemed pretty ready to stab us even if we did what they wanted. He had screwed me over and dragged me into bad things before this. But I can't forgive him even though he let us go. He wasn't exactly a good person to begin with, but this was way too far. I did recently hear that he has turned his life around, but I'm done with him and I hope I never see him again. Story 14. Robber tried to break into the car while we were in it. I was about 8 or 9 years old when this happened, placing it around 2005 or 2006. At the time, I was living in Southwest Florida with my mother in a not-so-great part of town. So one day my mother is driving me to a scout meeting for girls. I'm in the rear driver's side seat, directly behind my mom. We're at a busy intersection, in the turn lane, waiting for the light to turn green for us to make a right. This guy comes running down the middle of the road, like literally just running between cars on this main road. He's screaming, "Help me! Help me! Please!" My mom sees him in the rear view mirror on her side, and although she is a good Samaritan and a kind person, she's also cautious. So she cracks her window maybe 4 to 5 inches to see what's wrong, thinking maybe he'd gotten into an accident or something. Guy comes running up to my mother's window and shoves his arm into the car, almost up to his elbow. He's obviously trying to open the door or hit the power locks or windows to get in. My mom, being the badass she is, punches the shit out of this guy's hand a few times, and you could hear a pop, then a crack. She must have broken at least one of his fingers. She rolls the windows up and crunches his fingers some more before he can get his arm out all the way. Meanwhile, I'm watching from the back seat, completely petrified and unable to move. He starts beating on the window, saying we better let him in or he'll kill us. At this point the light turns green, and as soon as the cars in front of us turned, my mom burned rubber to GTFO of there. We make it to the location of the scout meeting. By this time, I'm no longer in shock and I'm freaking out. I start crying a bit, but everything is okay. My mom calls the police department to let them know what happened and that we fled the scene. The officer informs her that a church at Chitty had been robbed not even a block away from the intersection we were at. The suspect had fled on foot and eventually was caught, but the officer assumed that was the man who tried to break into our car. At the time, I didn't think too deep besides being spooked by the incident itself. As I've gotten older, I think about the worst-case scenarios. What if he had been able to get in? Would he have hurt my mom? Would he have hurt me? What if he'd pulled my mom out of the driver's seat and driven away with me in the car? What if he'd had a weapon? So, electronic thief and attempted carjacker, let's not meet again. Story 15. The Closing Shift Creep. This begins in 2011. I had just turned 24 and, with my cosmetology license, I began working at a hair salon down the street from my apartment. I lived in a very wealthy suburban neighborhood on the water. I called it the sleepy beach town. Most nights I worked the front desk, closing with my coworker, Becky. Becky was a shy and reserved younger girl, who would easily get embarrassed talking to customers. I, on the other hand, was very extroverted and took pleasure talking with anyone and everyone. The salon was divided 3 ways. There was the room to the left where the stylist cut and colored hair. The receptionist's desk was on the right when you first walked in, and behind it, there was a wall between the desk and the back room, reserved for guest waiting, spa treatments, and shampooing. I had to approach from the side to get behind the desk. It started off as a typical night at the salon. There were 2 stylists finishing up a couple clients in the stylist room, while I was busy training Becky on how to close out the cash register. The clock just turned 6:30 p.m., and it was already dark out when a man walked in. He was tall and a true silver fox with a full head of hair. He wore a black North Face fleece, and he looked like your typical Pacific Northwest local. He asked me if he could take seat and wait. This is not a weird request in the salon since many women's husbands come to pick them up and wait until their wife's appointment is finished. I assumed this man was doing the same. 20 minutes passed, and then he walked right up next to Becky and I behind the counter. He looked down at me and says, "I've been waiting but no one has showed up." I politely asked who he was waiting for, and he replied, "You know, winks, no sir, I do not. How can I help you? Are both of you over 18? Excuse me? I have good money and I've been patiently waiting. Now I'm getting irritated. I want my massage and I want it now." Fear had crept over me since he started standing there, especially because he had his hand in his pocket, and because he was hovering over me in an area with no escape. And then I noticed the handle of a knife sticking out his fleece, and the wristband of a medical patient ID. I signaled to Becky to call 911, but she had completely frozen. I told the man he needed to come to the front of the counter if he wanted me to begin his appointment. He slowly sauntered to the front of the counter. Then he leans in and softly says to me, "I like that dark shade of lipstick you're wearing. Will you be wearing it for me?" That was when I grabbed the phone and made it very apparent I was calling 911. I quickly began giving a full description of him, including the wristband I had noticed. He turned around and left out the front. I had this weird feeling that he wasn't done yet, and so I locked the entry door. A few moments later he came running up, stopped, and stared into my eyes. His eyes looked empty and careless with rage as he began punching the front door. He slowly turned and quietly started walking away. While this was going on, I told everyone to remain calm and said that it was being handled. Thankfully, the cops showed up immediately and detained him. The officer had explained to me the man had escaped the psychiatric hospital a few towns over and was looking for a happy ending massage parlor. During our weekly team meeting, the owner of the salon told me that what I did was not protocol and that if it were to happen again, to get an adult to help. I left that salon shortly after and am very happy with my career change into real estate, so far. Creepy man escaping the psychiatric hospital for a quickie. Let's not meet again. Story 16. I had a dream, and I have to marry her. When I was about 16 years old, I worked at a restaurant as a pianist. It was a nice semi-formal restaurant, not very trendy, but seen as a well-established place where parents would take their graduating children and elderly couples would have date nights. White tablecloths and fresh flowers on the table, it was a pretty popular place. It was a great gig, especially since I was quite young, and my parents would drop me off in the evenings twice a week, Friday and Saturday nights. It was in an older part of town, the kind of place where you don't go walking at night. I live in South Africa though, so you pretty much never walk at night. We have car guards in most South African cities, and while there's sometimes dodgy guys trying to make some quick drug money because they found a reflective vest in the trash, my restaurant had a wonderful guy. His name was Daddy, and he was a huge dude from Zimbabwe. He'd always walk me up the path when my parents dropped me off, and come to tell me when my parents had arrived to pick me up. Part of my pay was a free staff meal, and on this occasion my mother had decided to come in early with me, so we could eat together. As we walked in, the owner immediately saw me and dashed over to us, clearly bursting to tell me something. Apparently, earlier that day, a man had come in and asked him if the pianist started at 8 tonight as usual. The owner, Paul, had confirmed yes, and asked if he'd wanted to book a table. He'd said no, and Paul, seeing he looked like he probably couldn't afford to eat there anyway, had asked why he'd inquired. The man informed him that he'd had a dream, and he was going to come in and marry the pianist. The pianist was his soulmate, and he wasn't going to miss out on this chance to let her know. Quite bewildered at this information, and thinking maybe a friend from school was playing a joke, I'd asked what the guy looked like. I remember Paul trying to put it nicely. Well, he was sort of short. 30-ish? Plump long hair. He had a hat on. I had no friends who matched this description, and at this stage I was the only female pianist at the establishment, so my mother and I were quite weirded out. We sat down on the closed-in balcony to order, right by a big window. It was about 7:45, quite dark outside, and I was getting ready to leave the table to start playing, when a movement in the shrubs outside the window caught my eye. "Mom," I whispered, and she looked over to where I had jerked my head. There, skulking outside the window and watching us was a short, very overweight guy. He was wearing all black, with a dirty black trench coat and a black fedora. He had long dark stringy hair and a large silver cross hanging around his neck. It was a sinking, horrible feeling realizing he was watching me. I don't know if it was mostly because I was pretty young and sheltered, but realizing that this strange man knew who I was, what I looked like, thought about me, wanted to marry me, made me feel almost debilitated with fear. My mom, however, quickly realized that while I was in the view of the window, she wasn't. She told me, "Stay here," and got up and left the table, staying out of view of the man. She went to the manager, and got him to phone Daddy on his cell phone. We were sitting towards the back of the restaurant, and Daddy was on the street. After about a minute of me sitting there, pretending not to notice the beady-eyed, sweaty-looking man outside, I saw the light of Daddy's torch bouncing off the hedges. Out the corner of my eye, I saw the man start to scuffle around, trying to work out which way to go. I took this opportunity to stand up and get away from the window. I sat in the back until Daddy came in to tell me it was okay to start playing. They never told me whether he ran away or had to be removed, or what exactly happened. They wouldn't tell me any details, which sort of just made me more apprehensive. Daddy just said that he wouldn't ever let him back in. He told me that he drove a rusty, red small car. I'd later find out it was a really old Fiat Uno. I found out because every 2 weeks or so, on one of the nights I was working, it'd be parked down the street, far away enough from the restaurant that Daddy couldn't make him leave. Sometimes even around the corner, out of eyesight until we were driving home. I knew the sound of the car, the rattly old exhaust pipe. I knew the number plate. Sometimes when we drove past, I could see a shadow of him in the driver's seat. Sometimes I couldn't. I always wondered where he was then. From then on, my parents had Daddy's number saved to their phones, and my dad would come get me when it was dark. Sometimes when I was waiting to be picked up if we closed early, I started heading down the path to see if my parents were back. Daddy would see me from the gate. Sometimes he beckoned to me to come down and wait with him, and we'd hang out. Sometimes he shook his head. "Not yet, sissy." That's when the car would be down the street. I never really saw the man again, so there was never really anything I could do about it. It was always in the back of my mind though. I continued to work there until my final year of high school, and I quit when Daddy moved back up to Zimbabwe. So, Daddy, my friend and protector, thank you. And creepy black fedora stranger in the rusty red car, let's not meet. Story 17. Battle in the elevator. My first year of college was a real challenge for me. I'm extremely introverted, and while I do have friends I spend time with, I do not make friends very easily. I'm simply too shy to approach others, and I am no good at connecting with strangers. It's just who I am, and I'm okay with that. When I started classes that fall, I was the invisible girl. Never called attention to myself if I could help it. You know the type, I'm sure. There are a lot of people who specialize in invisibility. So I didn't have a lot of friends that semester, just people I would call acquaintances. We got along fine but couldn't really be called friends. Now at this time I was battling my own demons too. When I was 16 I was brutally raped, and by no means was I over it. It was a major factor in my life. I went to therapy regularly and was treated for major depression, extreme anxiety disorder, and PTSD. I was walking a thin line trying to pull myself together and get on with life while at the same time feeling very isolated, and therefore vulnerable, around others. I avoided men whenever I could simply because I wasn't ready to let my guard down, and it was exhausting being on constant high alert. I was also rather paranoid. It's impossible to avoid potentially dangerous, to my paranoid mind, situations when living on campus and being the loner that I was. There were times when I simply had to walk back to my dorm in the dark or participate in a group project with men, etc. I worked hard on my self-confidence, and while I eventually overcame my fears, at that time I was always on edge. I'm sure you can understand. One day I went to class in the humanities building. Not a big deal, but the classroom was on the top floor of a tall building and I usually rode the elevator. That elevator was slow as fuck but still better than walking up 12 flights of stairs. With me? I get to the building, call the elevator, and wait. To my surprise, when the doors opened I was the only one who got in. This was a relief because of my paranoia. Then it happened. The doors were closing when someone stuck a hand in the middle and 4 guys got in. This wasn't good. My anxiety hit the roof and I backed myself in a corner so I felt somewhat safer. I kept telling myself I was perfectly safe, that these men weren't going to hurt me and I should relax. Then one of the bastards turned to me, grinned maliciously and said, "There's only one girl here. Let's get her." And all shit broke out. I'm sure now it was a joke, albeit a very disgusting one, but at the time I didn't take it that way. At all. When he made that comment I panicked. I had my book bag, full to bursting with heavy books, on the ground in front of me. In my terror I picked it up and started swinging. When the doors finally opened there were 4 very surprised men either on the ground or huddling away from me while I stood in the middle, hyperventilating and still swinging. I have never seen anyone exit an elevator that fast, and I'm not talking about me. Those guys actually stumbled over each other trying to get away from me. It took me a long time to calm down, but in the end it was a huge step in rebuilding my confidence. I'd been in a potentially dangerous position with 4 men and I defended myself quite effectively. That was the beginning of reclaiming myself. So, intentional creepy dude who threatened rape as a joke, perhaps next time you pull that misogynistic shit we will meet again. If we do, I'm ready. Story 18. I think someone was entering my house when I was at school. My mother and my visiting aunt were out shopping and my brother was with my father at my dad's place. He was suspended, which was only a 3-minute drive away. My brother was always the last person to leave the house, and he almost always left the door unlocked even though we told him not to. He always thought it would be fine because we lived up a hill in a bushland area. It was about 10:30 when I heard footsteps towards the locked front door. I figured it would be my aunt and mother, but then I heard a very intense jiggling of the handle, and the click sound the lock makes when you try to open the door. I then heard something that terrified me, a man, cursing and groaning in annoyance. After the footsteps passed my window, I peeked out from my curtains. I saw bare feet and worn-out jeans. Needless to say, I freaked the hell out, and called my dad, who was up in very short time. After looking around the house, he found nothing. I don't think my family believes me, but I know it was real. It couldn't have been my brother either because he was with my dad when it happened. After thinking it through, I got really worried. I had noticed only a few weeks before that my money was slowly lessening. I had originally blamed it on my brother, but after that encounter I figured it probably wasn't my brother. So, to the creepy guy that most likely entered my house, let's not meet. Story 19. Dog sitting and a gross abuse of Wi-Fi. Last year, I was dog sitting for my aunt. The dog is small, sweet, and a little skittish. I had work most of the week, so I was just living in the house for the time being. It's a nice house, not big enough to feel empty if you're alone, but not small enough to feel cramped. The only rooms I used were the kitchen, bathroom, living room, and the guest bedroom. My last day of work this particular week was a double shift. I was excited because after this I had 2 days off. I planned on using them to introduce the dog to RuPaul's Drag Race. I usually try to keep good spirits for a double shift because regardless of the time and annoying customers, extra money is always needed. My old job was a barista and cashier. Mornings are always busy and nights are slow. On weekends, people are more concerned with coffee and breakfast than anything else we may have to offer. I was having a nice time, actually, because this day was turning out to be not as hectic as the previous ones that week, one even involving a small fire. As the morning rush line was dwindling, the limited tables in the restaurant came into view and I started people watching. As I slowly scanned the customers eating bagels and reading the paper, my eyes met a man at a laptop. He had long, dirty hair and a bit of stubble. He stared at me with a little too much intensity. I wondered if he found my people watching rude, so I decided to clean and restock instead. It didn't take long for a line to reform, so I returned to my register. Once again, after the line died down, I could see the few tables in the front. The man was still there, and he was still staring at me. Every now and then he would look at his computer, and then back to me. It almost felt like he was looking right through me, or like he could see every part of me. It felt so uncomfortable that I went and cleaned in the back of restaurant, out of his sight. After the next rush, I took my break and sat far away from the man. He was out of my sight, and I was out of his. When I came back from my break, the man was gone. My manager asked if I had interacted with him at all. I told her about him making eye contact with me, but that nothing else really happened. She told me that the man had been watching porn on his laptop and she had asked him to leave. So that was weird enough. This man had been watching porn and staring at me. I really wish that this is where the story stopped. Hours passed and the rest of the day was entirely normal, despite me and a few female coworkers feeling a slight edge. We were in the process of closing, which is actually a process I really enjoy. I'm one of those weirdos that likes to clean. We're well in, and I'm almost done with my assigned jobs when my manager comes up to me again. She informs me that the man had found his way back in the restaurant at some point, and she found him hiding in a back corner. She chased him out by threatening to call the police. She knew that earlier in the day, he seemed to be paying attention to me. She said I could finish up whatever I wanted or needed to, but afterwards she strongly advised me to get home as soon as possible. She also offered to walk me to my car. I took both offers and quickly got my things together and clocked out. My aunt's house was not far from work. It was a 5-minute drive at most, which was helpful because then I didn't feel crippling anxiety for much longer. I got in the house and after triple checking that I had locked every door, got into my pajamas. But unsurprisingly, I was not ready to sleep yet. Now was the time to introduce the dog to RuPaul's Drag Race. I went into the living room. The living room consists of a couch, 2 chairs, a TV, a window, and the front door. Unfortunately, the porch light was broken and the window had no curtains. That had me a little stressed. But I was willing to take that over the only other TV in the house, which was the one that exists in the scary basement. Facing the basement TV included having my back to a sliding glass door facing the very dark woods. No thanks. I was setting up the TV when the dog started growling. I really didn't think much of it. As I said, the dog is skittish, so he growls and barks all the time. I wasn't looking at him. I was muttering, "Shush, shush," and figuring out how to work the TV. The dog didn't stop and started to get louder, so I finally put down the remote and turned to face the dog. I froze. The dog was barking at the window, and there was an outline of a man at the window. The exact same build as the one at the restaurant. I screamed, and luckily that was enough for the man to run away from the window. I stood there frozen for a while. The dog had calmed down, but I hardly felt safe. So I went into the kitchen, grabbed a big knife, and did what any responsible adult would do, called my mommy. She did not advise calling the police. My mom never does, and instead came and spent the night with me. I told my aunt. I spent the rest of my time dog sitting clutching the knife any time I slept or took a shower. My aunt also gave me permission to have one friend stay with me every night. Nothing else ever happened. I never even saw the guy come into work again. A part of me wishes I knew who he was or where he went, or what he even wanted with me. I'm glad he was a coward and that all it took to scare him off was my scream and an extra small dog. Let's not meet again, stalker porn guy. Who watches porn in a sandwich shop, anyway? Story 20. Someone tried to abduct my friend and I. It's when I was about 10 years old. One late night my friend's parents took us out for ice cream. It was probably around 9:30 p.m. The small town we were in settled down for the night, most businesses having already closed up shop for the night. At the time, our town had less than 9,000 people living in it. My friend's parents were both insanely busy and successful people. They owned many houses and rented them out. His dad owned his own business with at least 200 employees. His mother was a college professor, worked in a hospital and did something else online, forget what, just that she was always on her phone, pager or laptop, and they were pretty inattentive parents. My friend and his brother on multiple occasions broke furniture and other things fighting, and they wouldn't notice for days, and never ever made a big deal about anything. After pulling up away from the store just enough that you couldn't see the car from inside due to other cars being parked closer, presumably the employees, as no one else was there and the parking lot was otherwise completely empty, my friend's parents got out of the car and went ahead of us into the ice cream shop, Baskin-Robbins, not realizing we were still in the car. Their car had this weird automatic seatbelt system, and when I opened my door, the belt wasn't disengaging like it was supposed to, and I had trouble getting it off of me, so my friend helped me. Eventually we figured it out, and got out of the car. As we step onto the sidewalk, an old man, late 50s, early 60s, intercepts us, really beady-looking eyes. Thinking back, I wonder if he was high on something, but at the time he just seemed off. "You kids want to buy a mountain bike?" he asked, half-crooked smile and lazy eye giving him this incredibly off-putting appearance, especially after we heard his voice. He sounded like a smoker. His teeth were yellow, and we could smell his awful breath from where we were standing. To give you an idea as to what I was like at that age, I was incredibly, frustratingly naive. You could run just about anything by me, and with little effort I would believe it. I was so naive. I took the fun out of it for many people who tried to trick me, because even after explaining they lied to me, I would shrug and act like it didn't matter either way, and taking a while to understand it regardless. Despite this, even I knew something was off about this guy. "Why would we need a mountain bike?" my friend asked before I get the chance to ask anything myself. "Well, 'cause you kids like to go hiking, don't ya? Mountain bikes make it way easier." "But there's two of us," I responded. "What if we both want a mountain bike? Who gets to have it?" This is where he made his first attempt to get us away from where we were. "Well, I have another one at my house." "But we don't have any money, we're kids. How are we gonna pay for them?" my friend asked. The man went silent for a minute and just stared at us. "You know what, you can pay me back later for it. It's right over there in my van." He pointed across the parking lot, but we didn't see any van. "It's behind that building right there. Now, I don't normally do this, but you seem like trustworthy kids to me." That's when my friend and I looked at each other and decided it was time to go ahead and get to his parents. We'd heard enough from this guy and we were seriously creeped out. As we started to walk past him, he backed up and got in our way again. At this point I was wondering why my friend's parents hadn't come out of the Baskin-Robbins yet. Surely they realized we weren't there yet? Maybe they saw me struggling with my seatbelt and just assumed it was taking us a while to get it figured out. Either way, I didn't see them yet. "You kids can't walk away from this. This is the best deal you're ever gonna get on mountain bikes," the man stated condescendingly. "How stupid would you feel knowing you could have had a bike for free?" "We already have bikes," my friend muttered. "But I bet they aren't mountain bikes," the man growled. He seemed angry at this point. His friendly demeanor turned to frustration. He started to walk toward us when my friend's dad walked out of the Baskin-Robbins and asked us what was taking so long. The old man reeled and pushed his way past us, walking briskly until he full-on sprinted behind a building. Neither of us said anything. We were too shaken. Something else I should mention about my friend's parents. While they were inattentive, they were two of the most sincere and genuine human beings I've ever met. Always seeing the good in people and denying any bad even existed. I really don't think his dad pieced together what he saw, and without us giving any indication, besides our unusual silence, that something was wrong, he likely had no idea. It was days before we even talked to each other about it, months before we brought it up to anyone else. I shudder to think what would have happened to us had my friend's dad not left the Baskin-Robbins when he did. It's something I push to the back of my head often, but crops up every now and then. Story 21. What I had to deal with because someone didn't like my 8-year-old self. When I was 8 years old, I spent most of my free time playing in the streets near my house. I had a few friends from school who lived nearby, so I was always with them whenever I was out. Our group was made up of myself and my friends, not their actual names, Jake, Mark, and Carl. Although there were usually other people with us. Everything was great, and I never had any problems. We would frequently do things we shouldn't have been doing, but we managed to stay out of trouble. Some pretty strange things happened to us on some occasions, but nothing stopped us, and we always felt fairly safe. This was the case until the day I met Chris. He was 18 and lived on the same street as Jake. I don't know how they came to know each other, but they claimed to be friends. We met in the alley behind Chris's house where he was playing with a remote control car. I was happy to meet him, but he clearly had a much different opinion of me. On the day I met him, I was only with Jake, so I wanted to stay with him rather than going home. However, I wasn't given much choice, as Chris told me to fuck off and threatened to set me on fire with a lighter he had. Jake wouldn't back me up, so I just left feeling sad because Jake was my best friend. As I reached the end of the alley, I looked behind me and saw Chris setting his car on fire. He looked up at me and my 8-year-old self could see the hatred on his face. This scared me, so I ran the rest of the way home. I didn't see Chris again for a while, and I made sure to avoid going near his house. Unfortunately, this didn't last, despite my best efforts. This second time I saw him, he was riding his bike down the street with a bunch of other people who seemed to be about the same age. He swore at me as he passed, and the people with him did the same. Every day he did exactly the same thing, but he and his gang would chase us down and crash into us. Every day I would have new tire marks on my legs from where I was hit. For some reason Chris had decided that he would terrorize and bully all of the kids in the area. I stupidly decided to continue as if everything was fine and didn't tell anyone about what was happening. Things continued to get worse, and in one encounter with Chris he chased me down the street with a sledgehammer and threatened to kill me if he caught me anywhere near his house. For some reason, this still did not deter me. Not long after that, Chris attacked me with a whip and forced me to carry large stacks of bricks and build a ramp for him to jump his bike. Although on this occasion he stopped whipping me and decided to help me build the ramp before telling me to leave. On another similar occasion, Chris whipped me and forced me to walk a mile carrying a radiator. I don't know how Chris was never caught doing this, but somehow nobody saw him or tried to stop him. I would have tried to run, but I wasn't exactly the fastest, and he would have caught me easily, and things may have been much worse. To this day I still have scars from that. After that I was near my friend Carl's house and unintentionally interrupted Chris and his friends trying to set some bushes on fire. They chased me with homemade flamethrowers and I was almost set on fire. I managed to escape unscathed, but things didn't get better. A few days later my dad's car was broken into it, and things were stolen. He threw rocks at both of my parents, and even threw one through the window of my dad's car while he was driving. We kept calling the police on him, and when he threw the rock through my dad's window, my dad threw it back at him. Most of the time my parents were caught completely off guard by his attacks, and it's a miracle that nobody got hurt. Chris and his friends kept terrorizing me, my friends and my family. I was finally left alone when my granddad caught one of Chris' friends chasing me on a bike. He knocked him off his bike, grabbed and threatened him. I never had any problems with Chris after that, but he kept treating everyone around him like shit. A few years later I heard that he was arrested after a police manhunt, and his family moved away. That was the last I heard about Chris, and it has been about a decade since the incident with my granddad. I'm now 18 and Chris will be about 28, but I still never want to see him again. The only thing he ever did for me was give me a story to tell people about how weirdly dangerous my life was when I was 8. I don't know why he was the way he was, but I don't care, I just hate him. Story 22. Made me think twice about being a good Samaritan. It was about 11 at night, and I'm outside the door to my flat, as I'm not allowed to smoke inside. I don't live in a great area, so I am always wary about being out when it's late. I see a group of people walking up the road, maybe 5 or 6, all quite young, late teens, early 20s. As they pass, they all seem fine, just laughing and joking together, and not really paying me any attention. As they walk out of my line of sight, I hear one start to yell to someone. He's yelling things like, "Are you okay, mate?" and "hello." I move up to my gate to get a better look at what's happening and see a guy passed out on the floor. I stick around as he comes to and tells them he is fine and to leave him be. They all keep walking after, repeatedly trying to help him but getting nowhere. I walk back inside my flat and into my bedroom where my girlfriend is already in bed. I tell her what happened. I go to the window and see that he has once again passed out on the edge of the road. I didn't really know what to do, so I dial 999 and ask for the police. The woman I speak to insists I call back and ask for an ambulance, which I do. I explain the situation, but they're asking me stuff I don't know, like is he breathing, is he awake, and is he bleeding. They tell me to stay near, get an answers to all of these questions, and they will have someone call me back. I decided to put my jeans back on and go outside. I ask my girlfriend to stay inside in case I need her to call the police, and in general for her to stay safe. She protests this idea and is following me downstairs and out the door. I walk over and call out to him so he knows I'm there, As I do, some guy getting out of his car tells me he has called an ambulance, and it's going to be an hour. At this point he decides to get in his car and leave. I sit on the floor against the neighbor's wall and start to talk to the drunk guy, asking his name and where he's been tonight. He goes into detail about his breakup and his pregnant ex and how his life is shit, and I just keep him talking with general bullshit answers like it'll pass and things like that. He was annoying, but like drunk annoying, making comments about my girlfriend who is sat with me and just being a bit of a dick. As we sit there talking, it's about 11:40 now, and a car rolls past us, slows down, stops and reverses. All of the lights in the car are off, but I can make out a bottom half of a face through the window. It's a nice car. I later found out it was Vauxhall Insignia something sport. I see a hand raised to the mouth of the driver and immediately think police, plainclothes officers in an unmarked car. The drunk guy asks who that is, and I say it's the police. That's when 3 people step out of the car, the driver first, a young guy, stubbly beard, smart clothes, and then the other 2 people. Both with their coat hoods up and using a hand to pull the collars up over the bottom half of their face. I feel so stupid that this was the first point I realized something was wrong. They're all stood round our side of the car, and I see the 2 passengers have knives in their hands. My stomach churns and I feel my skin start to buzz. I'm sat on the floor, I can't stand up or they might go for me. I have my girlfriend here and I have no idea what they want. I'm shitting myself. The driver asks what's going on here, looking at 3 people sat on the floor. I feel like we all look drunk and easy pickings to him and his friends. I decide to lie. I immediately say I have called the police. They're on their way, as I found a drunk guy on the floor outside my house. I sit there for what feels like forever as they stare at us. Then the driver says, "I believe you, we are police too," and he heads back to his car. The drunk guy on the floor starts mouthing off about how they aren't police, and telling them to fuck off. I tell him to shut the fuck up and awkwardly tell the people from the car to have a nice night, which I feel really stupid about. They get in their car and leave. I jump up and actually do call the police, and they arrive in under 5 minutes. This whole thing shit me up for weeks. I didn't want my girlfriend walking home alone after work. I had to walk her to work every day. Hey guys with the nice car, let's not meet again. It gets a bit weird when the police turn up, but that's less creepy, more weird. Story 23. Someone smashed a window right behind me. Back when I was in the 8th grade, my mom and my brother had to venture out to Guitar Center to get my brother's guitar fixed. This meant that I was going to be home alone for an hour or 2, which I was pretty used to. 13-year-old me immediately hops onto Minecraft. I started playing with 2 of my friends and was talking to them via Skype. It was a sunny day outside, and it was also a school day, so there was nothing to be scared about outside or anything. After about 30 minutes of playing, I heard a loud bang that came from outside. It scared me, but I thought nothing of it. It sounded like it came from my backyard, but I assumed it was just my neighbors working or doing something else. Now the room I'm in has a sliding glass door and windows all around it. I could not see outside because my mom put the blinds and curtains over every window before she left, just for my safety. I should have gotten up to check out what the noise was, but I was pretty focused on whatever I was doing in Minecraft. Another loud bang happened, and this time I was sure it was on our house. I asked my friends in a whisper if they heard what I heard, but my mic didn't pick it up. Then I saw him for the first time. The blinds didn't reach all the way to the floor, so there was about 6 inches of space on the bottom of the sliding glass door that you could see out of. 2 black shoes were all I saw. At this point I'm freaking out. I put down my headset and am thinking of what to do. In the midst of me looking at the shoes and figuring out what to do, the window directly behind me smashed, glass going all over me. The sound of it made my heart come out of my body. I quickly turn around and another man is behind the blinds that were still hanging, but I was still able to see him. He had a crowbar and was wearing a black hat. Without thinking I make a bolt for the front door, not knowing if he was chasing me or not. I should also mention I had a really bad leg injury from my track meet the previous day, and it was so bad I could barely walk. I didn't even feel the pain. I had so much adrenaline. I quickly threw open the front door and shut it right away without looking back. I ran across the street to my neighbor's and climbed and jumped over her fence, still not noticing how bad my leg was hurting. Knocking on her door frantically for about 15 seconds, she came out, and I just rushed inside and told her to call 911. The police showed up to my neighbor's house within 10 minutes, and I pointed across the street to where my house was. They went through the entire house and through the backyard, but there was no one there anymore. The police came back to talk to me and said they found a partially smashed bathroom window, first sound, and partially smashed sliding glass door, second sound, and of course the window completely smashed that was behind me. The two guys were never found. The weird thing about the whole thing is why they were breaking into my house in complete daylight, and on a school day, if that matters. My friends who heard the whole thing through my mic heard the crash of the window, and some faint voices. The police even talked to them through my headset for the police report, lol. The whole event freaked me out for the next month, though I did get a lot of popularity in school. I am going to be a senior this year, and now I'm completely over it, thankfully. I even joke about it a lot now, lol. Story 24. Intruder walks into wrong. Back in college, my brother and I lived in a big apartment complex in a semi-crappy neighborhood. We'd been having issues in the building with a prowler. Really annoyed us because the building outside door was supposed to stay locked, but stupid kids in the building would keep propping the door open. This was bad because it would allow people from the neighborhood who did not belong to get in. The prowler would walk into the building and try to get into people's apartments. The girls above us got robbed because they left their door unlocked and he got in. Well, interestingly enough, my bro and I had just gotten our gun permits and joined a shooting/pistol club in the city. Well, one fine evening we are sitting in the living room cleaning and loading our weapons. He's got his Smith & Wesson .357 in his hand sitting on the couch near the door. I'm on the other side of the room and had just slid the magazine into my .45 caliber SIG. Well, wouldn't you know it, just then the door opens. This little douchebag steps into the apartment with a hoodie up and dressed all in black. I rack the slide on my pistol and ask him who the fuck he is. He stammers something about, "Sorry, wrong apartment," then runs out the door. We hit the ground running up the stairs after him, with our guns concealed on us. He cuts around the corner, we follow him at a distance, all the while calling him out. He kept walking at a good pace. We followed, not really close, looking for an altercation but trying to put a scare into him, which I think we did. Eventually he gave us the slip, which in hindsight was a good thing. But no more issues in the building after that night. Probably more of a terrifying story for him than for us, so sorry, creepy home invader, better luck next time. Story 25. It gave him a thrill. This was 10 years ago, just after my parents divorced and were in the process of selling my childhood home. My mom had moved across town and my dad, who traveled for a living, was gone for long stretches of time, leaving my older brother and I alone often. As teenagers, we didn't mind. Even with this upheaval at home, our lives were fairly routine. Both of us worked and were in school, so we left and got home at the same times each day. At night, we'd go to the gym just outside of our neighborhood for a couple of hours. My brother's friend, James, would join us. One night, James, my brother, and another one of their friends, Christopher, were hanging out at our house, washing their cars in preparation for the weekend. Since it was dark, my brother had borrowed my car keys to illuminate the driveway with my headlights so they could see. When they were finished, my brother asked me if I felt like going to the gym with them, and I declined. I wasn't feeling up to it, so they left me home alone. Before I went upstairs to my bedroom to blare music, now the house was empty. I noticed that the front door was unlocked and the back door was locked. This detail didn't particularly alarm me because we lived in a safe neighborhood centered by golf courses and a country club. In other words, I had nothing to worry about. I went to my room and listened to loud music for about half an hour with my door shut. Then, hungry, I went downstairs to fix myself something to eat. That's when I noticed the front door was locked. I wasn't too concerned at this point. Perhaps I had locked it before I went upstairs. I didn't remember locking it, but it was the most rational explanation. Then, I noticed the back door was unlocked. I definitely didn't unlock the back door. As irrational, then, as it seemed, it hit me with a jolt. Somebody was in our house. My brother had left my car keys on the counter in the kitchen. I grabbed them and ran out the front door to my car. I put the keys in the ignition and it didn't start. My brother had left the lights on. The battery was dead. Motherfucker. It was like being in a horror movie. Frantic, I called my brother. Since he had his headphones plugged into his phone listening to music while he worked out, he was forced to answer. "I think somebody is or was in our house," I said. I told him about the front door and how I didn't lock it, so either somebody was in our house or in the backyard. "Can you please come home?" And as I said this, a man with a miniature baseball bat comes from the side yard of our house. His pace was quick as if he didn't want to be seen, but it slowed once he reached the road, where he walked normally, as if nothing had happened. I told my brother what I just saw. "I recognize him," I said. "It's our neighbor." My brother and his friends came rushing home about 10 minutes later. I repeated the story. "Okay," my brother, a hothead, said. "We're going over to his house." I sat back at home after the four of us had checked every room in the house with my dad's gun. It was clear. No one was there. When they came back, they told me that they'd knocked on the front door and an older woman had answered. The look on her face, James said later, was like she'd been expecting us. "And that's when her middle-aged son, the guy with the bat, came down," my brother said. "Before we even spoke, he yelled out, 'I didn't break into anybody's house.'" "We never said that," my brother had said. "We just wanted to tell you that somebody was in our house just now." The mother had taken on a protective, though somewhat submissive, stance. "Listen, I'm so sorry. It won't happen again. I promise it." My brother and his friends saw in her eyes that she knew they were telling the truth, that her son wasn't. "It better not," my brother had said, looking up at her son behind her. When they got home, they recounted this story for me, and we began to dissect what had happened. We'd seen this man before. He was older, late 30s, early 40s, and lived with his elderly parents. He only seemed to come out at night, when he would go on long walks around the neighborhood, muttering to himself, carrying a miniature baseball bat to fend off dogs, as he'd been overheard telling a neighbor. He obviously had mental problems of some kind. And he'd obviously been watching our house. He knew our routine. We determined that he may have mistaken my brother's friend Christopher for me and, thinking the house empty, entered through the unlocked front door. When he realized that I was home, he then left through the back door and had hidden in the backyard until he thought the coast was clear. How long he'd been inside we weren't sure, but I'd been in my room for at least half an hour. Why he was breaking into our house, we didn't know. But we guessed it wasn't the first time he'd done something like this. And it may have been the overactive and speculative imaginations of a bunch of teenagers. But we guessed he did it because running around someone's empty house, unbeknownst to them, gave him some kind of sick thrill. Perhaps stalking people gave him something to do. And it was clear to us that he probably couldn't help himself. That he'd probably do it again. Story 26. A man with a gun in the night. Last weekend was one of my best friend's weddings. It was hosted at a small ghost town in a big barn. Other than a few houses scattered here and there, and all the old abandoned buildings that now function as small museums, there is nobody around for a couple miles. The reception was great, and the liquor was flowing freely. The party wraps up around 10 o'clock and my fiancé and our friends who are a couple stick around to help clean up before heading back to our hotel room. Around 11 o'clock I call our friend to come pick us up and take us back to our hotel. After getting bored of waiting around for a call back, I call the one cab in the area. I am informed that the cab has broken down and no rides are available. I checked my Uber app and am informed there are no cars out at this time. At this point we decide that we can probably walk the couple miles back to the hotel. The four of us grab a few items out of the car and head down the road. Very quickly, we get away from any buildings and are surrounded by big open fields. In our drunken state, it takes about half an hour for us to get about a half mile down the road. At this point, I get a phone call back from my friend saying he can come pick us up. The drunken decision is made that I will walk back to the barn with Chelsea, the girlfriend in the other couple. Jason and Jessica, my friend and my fiancé, would stay on the side of the road and we would pick them up there. Chelsea and I start back to the barn and get about 400 feet away when we catch a glimpse of a man walking towards us. There are no lights on this road and the minimal illumination is coming from the moon. Chelsea asks me if I had seen him when he comes out of some very dark shadows and walks right up to us. "You guys woke my family up. Is everything okay?" At this point, he is close enough to us that we notice he has a handgun on his belt. We apologize for waking his family and tell him our ride is at the barn and we are getting back to our hotel. At this point he places his hand on my shoulder and offers to give us a ride back to our hotel. "We help each other out around here. You guys aren't okay to drive, and neither am I, but I will drive you into town." We are walking down the street with him still holding my shoulder and inform him our friends are down the street and we are going to pick them up, but thank him for the offer. "You've already done enough and we're sorry for waking your family," Chelsea tells him. At this point he lets go of my shoulder and because of the darkness, I am unaware that he took Chelsea by the wrist and starts trying to lead her down his driveway. "It wouldn't be hard to find your friends in the field. Come with me and let me take care of you guys." Chelsea steps away from him without protest and he stays at the end of his driveway. "Let me know if you change your mind." We get about 20 feet away and Chelsea stops to take off her high heels when we start running away from him. I call Jason and tell him to hide in the field with Jessica and wait for us to pick them up. He is unsure if I am serious. I am running and tell him I can't explain right now but that I am very serious. We run the rest of the way back and get to the barn with our car waiting for us. We get in the car and tell our driver to get us down the street very quickly. We pick up Jason and Jessica safely and got back. Getting down into the ditch, Jessica left a bag on the side of the road. Without any idea of why we told them to hide, a car passed the bag, stopped and backed up and sat right next to them hiding for 30 seconds before pulling away slowly. Story 27. Followed on the way to the airport. For starters, I am a 24-year-old kind of strong guy. This happened to me last week, and I figured I should share it on this subreddit. My boss came up to me earlier that week and told me that I had to go to a conference in Dubai. I didn't feel like going alone, so I convinced the company to also pay for my coworker so he could also come. I was kind of excited, as I had never been to Dubai before, but it was only a week so I couldn't really tour or do anything. I started packing that day. The flight was non-stop and departed at 4:30 in the morning, so we had to be ready that night. Also, from where I live, the airport we are departing from is a 3-hour drive. We figured that we should just sleep on the plane. The day finally came, and the clock struck 9:30 p.m. We didn't want to be late, and also, it was raining super heavy. I loaded my brand new Honda Civic, which was warm in the garage, and used my phone to off all the lights when we left. I was about to pull out of the garage, when my friend told me that he forgot something. I was annoyed, but gave him the keys. Now this is where things get strange. When my friend returned to the car, he told me that there was a strange black Cadillac just parked with the lights on across the street. He said that all the lights inside the car along with the headlights were on, and a bald, jacked-up man was staring at our house. Now, I'm not usually the one to be paranoid, but this kinda creeped me out. I figured that we could just forget him because all the doors and windows were locked, and we were leaving anyway. Keep in mind it is almost 10 p.m. I pulled out the garage, and my friend locked it through his phone. It's automatic. We took off, ignoring the guy, when he started following us. I kinda got a little scared now, and judging by the look on my friend, he was also creeped. I got onto the freeway, and about 20 miles in, my friend told me that the guy is tailing us. I have read all that shit online on what to do if someone is following you, so, since we had time to kill, I took an exit and got back on the highway. Yup, this bastard was still following us. I didn't know what to do, but I know I had to stop him because I didn't want him to follow us to the airport. Now he was really close, but it was raining so hard that neither of us could get a plate number from the guy. We finally both got the balls to call the cops, and they said they would dispatch a squad car to our area. Also, I think I forgot to mention that the guy was staring at the back of our car with wide eyes. He looked high or drunk or I don't know, I just wanted to know why the hell he was following us. There were no more cars on the road, and it was raining like hell. I finally saw cop cars enter the highway from an exit, but when I looked back, the Cadillac was gone. I was shocked but happy. The cops pulled us over and took a report. We made it safely to the airport, gladly. So Black Cadillac, who had nothing better to do than follow us, let's never meet again. Story 28. Playground encounter. This happened a long time ago, when I was about 5 or 6 years old. I am 27 now. I didn't remember this until I was around 15, and after I did ask my mom if it was a real memory or just a dream. She confirmed it happened, or at least the parts she knew of. I live in the Netherlands, always have. The conversations were in Dutch, which I will translate as much as possible. As a kid I lived in a quiet neighborhood with around 100 houses. It was set up in sort of a big circle, with only one way for cars to enter, and only 2 other ways to enter by foot or bicycle. We lived on the part of the circle closest to the car entrance, which we called the front street. The other side of the circle we called the back street. On the back street side there was a small playground, which could be seen easily from the houses there. It had 2 swings on this T-shaped blue swing set, a yellow climbing tool shaped like a snail, and a small football field with 2 goals. I was allowed to play outside on my own, but wasn't allowed to go to the back street by myself. I did so anyway that day, and decided to go to the swings. There was nobody there when I arrived, probably as it was close to dinner time. I was wearing a blue dress, jeans I think, and those white tights little girls often wore in those days. I was playing around when suddenly 2 guys, which I now think were between 14 and 16, came up to me. I wasn't scared and figured they were just passing through, until one of them suddenly grabbed me from behind and held a pocket knife to my throat. I was of course very scared, and they started moving me further into the playgrounds, to a part filled with bushes and out of sight of the houses. The one holding me then said, roughly translated, "Pull down your pants or I will slice your throat." At this moment I was really scared, and even then the first thought that occurred to me was, "But I'm not even wearing pants." I was too scared to speak, and instead didn't move at all. Then seemingly out of nowhere his grip on me loosened, and looking around I saw why a woman was walking down the street in front of the playground. I broke loose and ran to her, muttered out what just happened, and ran off again. When I got home a moment afterwards I didn't tell my mom, because I was still too scared. I also thought I would get in trouble for going to the back street while she told me not to, so not telling seemed better. A few months later the doorbell rang. I opened the door to a woman of about my mom's age and a boy, one of the 2 boys from that day. I didn't say anything to them, left the door open and ran to my mom. I said to her, "That's him." She had no clue what I was talking about, so I quickly explained. She confronted them, the boy and apparently his mother, but he of course denied. As my mom couldn't be fully sure either, she didn't follow up on it. All in all, I think I am very lucky for having gotten off so easily, and not realizing what kind of a situation I had been in until many years later. Story 29. Drunk Theater Creep. This happened in March of 2014. I had just turned 18 and had been working at my local movie theater for about 5 or 6 months. It wasn't a busy day by any means, and I was on register in the snack bar when the seemingly typical man approached with his popcorn, hot dog, pickle, and drink. The only thing I noticed immediately as strange was the fact that he was wearing sunglasses still, but even that didn't really set off any alarm bells. I rang him up, and as I did so, he asked me if I was Hispanic. I was caught off guard by this question, as a red-haired, green-eyed white girl. I laughed a little bit and told him no, I wasn't Hispanic. He went on to tell me how I could pass for a Hispanic girl, his slur becoming evident. It wasn't until he started to lean over the counter that I became uncomfortable. He told me I had pretty eyes, and I thanked him as he paid, trying to get through the transaction as quickly as possible. Instead of heading to his movie, he took his food to the little island to my left, where we kept all of our condiments, napkins, and straws. This was pretty normal, as most patrons did stop by here to at least grab a straw and whatever else they needed before their movie started. This man, however, immediately opened and began eating his hot dog and casually munching on his popcorn. Something about him gave me a very bad feeling, so I kept my eye on him for a ridiculous 2 hours before saying anything. I still regret waiting so long, but this was a slow weekday and we only had a single podium set up at the front with poles set up that funneled to it from the entrances, so nobody was allowed into the lobby without a movie ticket. I watched him wander around the lobby, returning to the island periodically to eat his popcorn, and even had a couple of other guests ask me about him. I'd finally had enough of him when I saw him approach my best friend, who was on podium at the time. I'm fiercely protective of this girl and have confronted men multiple times for being inappropriate with her. This man, however, scared me bad enough that I worried about confronting him directly. I went and found a manager and brought them up to speed on the situation. They approached him, and then disappeared into the office, returning with the manager on duty of the day. I was too far away to hear any of the interaction from my register, but eventually our off-duty police officer, who was our theater's security, had to get involved, and they even had to call 2 more officers who were on duty because the man refused to leave and had become violent. Anyway, they arrested the man, and apparently they found 4 daggers as well as a throwing star in his pockets. When asked why he was carrying so many weapons, his response was, "Because I can't carry a gun." He was also very drunk. I'm not sure what became of him, but aside from the time a man threatened to skin me alive, it was the scariest thing I've ever dealt with at work. In hindsight, I should have reported him much sooner, but I did see his movie tickets, which were for 3 separate movies, come to find out, and I'm a suspicious person in general, so I chalked it up to paranoia until he started messing with my friend. She said he legitimately scared the hell out of her, though I can't really remember what he had said to her. It was a learning experience, to say the least. Story 30. A cop when you actually need one. So this happened earlier in this year. As a little background, I'm a 30-year-old male, married, 29 at the time, with a young daughter. I live in a rural Northern California town, pretty much right in the epicenter of the gold rush. And I don't know if it's all the ways the land was taken or the ways people killed for wealth back then, but it's always seemed to have a higher share of strange recluses and sovereign citizen types. That being said, this is not a haunting story, or strange people of the woods, but it was by far the most frightening encounter Eve experienced as a father. Some time ago I ended up with an extra day off, and my wife and I decided to go for a drive and check out a semi-local gun show. From time to time I would get tables at them and have friends who do them regularly, so we went to visit, as I am always looking for obscure parts and pieces for old military weapons, and had some family that lived in the area of this show too. We had a hell of a winter last year, so unsurprisingly it was a cold, gloomy day. We drove about an hour and knew the promoters, so walked right in. As I was passing tables in search of the right stuff, I was carrying my daughter with me. She was very small and ridiculously cute, so everyone wanted to look and ask about her, which is normal from what I've observed for parents. At times you even draw a small crowd, usually of sweet LOLs, old meaning little old ladies, and some grandpa types. As a side point, I had one grumpy lady tell me she was way too young. I looked at her confused, and said she's like 3 months old, she'll never remember. Back on topic, there was one man who seemed a bit more excited than most men his age, but he said that he had worked as an EMT and in a NICU for years, so seemed reasonable that he was so happy to see healthy babies. As the afternoon went on, he passed me a few more times, moving against the crowd, first sign, and commented on how beautiful she was. As babies often do at that age, my wife soon needed to breastfeed our daughter. We went out to the car and had blinders in the back seats so she could have privacy and keep the baby from distractions. I turned on the heater, locked the doors, and went back in to help a buddy sell during a busier point. About 10 to 15 minutes later, my phone starts ringing with my frantic wife on the other end. About 3 minutes before, I had noticed that law enforcement had gotten up and walked outside of the show. It took a minute to calm her down, but apparently the guy had followed us outside and been watching closely. My wife got the sudden feeling that makes your hair stand up whilst feeding in the car. That was when she saw a shadow standing outside her door, blocking it from opening, holding a small metal tube, mag light. At that same moment, a sheriff pulled up who had also seen us go to the car. The officer asked what was going on, and the man tried to say he was talking to my wife, who rolled the window down slightly and said she was not and didn't want either. The officer asked him his name, and when he turned around to run the name, he tried to scurry away. Name was a fake, hence why the other officers got up. Detained, he gave his real name, and within 1 minute of calling it in, the man was turned around and arrested. Turned out he had felony warrants for kidnappings. The man was waiting for the nearby cars to leave. He was about to try and take my wife and infant daughter. Had that cop not been right there, who knows how it have unfolded. Luckily there was a cop when we needed one. Story 31. Fishing hooks and lures. This went on over the course of a year, with the last incident taking place in December of 2016. I used to own this green 1998 Toyota Camry. It was my grandmother's until she gifted it to my parents, who eventually gave it to me as my first car. It was nice and reliable, but I have a bad habit of letting my cars accumulate a bunch of stuff before cleaning them out. Because I still lived with my parents, they would use the car from time to time if they needed it. One day, I noticed a bunch of fishing lines with hooks on them in the back of my car on one of the rare occasions that I clean it out. A bunch of the hooks are embedded into the upholstery, and more are between the creases on the seat. It takes me a while to get them all out, and I almost pricked myself several times doing it. I have no idea how long they were there, as the last time I cleaned this much of my car out was months ago. At any rate, I'm annoyed. At first, I thought that my dad had put them there, as he had recently used my car to transport a bunch of old junk for a garage sale. I asked him about it, but he told me he's never seen any fishing hooks or lines in any of the old stuff of ours, and nobody in my family even fishes, so it wouldn't make any sense for us to have it. He's also the only other person that has used my car at all in the past year or two. I'm the kind of person who locks up everything, every night. I triple-check my car doors, and if I'm even a little uncertain as to whether or not I locked up, I will go back to my car and check, no matter the inconvenience. I also park it where I can see it from my bedroom window, and hear if anyone tampers with it, so I doubted anyone could have broken in and just assumed my dad missed it, and didn't think anything more of it, until a month later when I found even more fish hooks in my back seat. At this point, I asked my dad about it again, but he figures I'm either pulling a weird prank on him, or someone is breaking into my car. I wonder though why anyone would break into my car, not steal anything out of it, and leave fishing hooks instead. It just didn't make sense to me. To give you an idea about how weird this is, I live in a neighborhood where everyone knows everyone. We all talk and even have a private Facebook group that started due to a drug house at the end of the street cropping up, though at this point it wasn't active, and as a sort of neighborhood watch group that always posts whenever something suspicious happens. So I don't have any neighbors I don't know for miles, and none of the ones I do know are this shady. Again, without any explanation or clear motive, as the days and weeks pass, it fades to the back of my head. I get a new job selling mattresses, as I'd been unemployed focusing on school for a while, and move out of my parents' house to live with my girlfriend. This is where things turn from weird to extremely unsettling. One night, we decide to go to a nearby Winco to get something to make food with, and I notice my back seat has a bunch of fishing lines and hooks in it again. Startled, I look around for any sign of someone being nearby. I tell her to get back in the house, and I sit up and stare at my car until morning comes from our bedroom window, after triple checking every door and window to ensure they were all locked, but I don't see anyone or anything. I get ready for work, and she gets ready for her college courses, and we leave. The store I was working at during this time had a weird L-shaped design to it, with 2 different entrances and a cafe taking up the space between them. There was one entrance that was easily visible from the front desk, and another that you would have to get up to go see. As I was closing up the night after the last incident, I go to turn off the open signs, and see in the center of the obscured hallway an entire roll of fishing line, coiled up but with some of the line leading to the door, where a pile of hooks sat. I had no customers that day, and never heard the door alarm go off. I then noticed someone had turned the door alarms off, but neither I nor my only coworker had ever tampered with the device before then, and it was behind the front desk. I was shaking. Someone had been stalking me and leaving these lines, but I had no idea what to do. Call the police? Other than the fishing lines and hooks, there was really nothing to trace back to anyone. My store had no cameras, and corporate would never agree to installing them. Neither my family nor my girlfriends could afford security cameras either. I figured the best I could do would be not to appear as frightened as I was, in case whoever was doing this was watching me. I thought that if seeing something like this didn't make me go about my day any differently, and I didn't give whatever reaction this person was looking for, that they would give up and go away. For several more months I would find fishing lines and hooks in my car, despite it being locked and my parents, being the only people with extra keys, being much too busy with the construction of their new house and their jobs to take time out of their day to prank me. Once or twice I would leave notes in my car asking whoever it was why they were doing this, and to stop, and I would find the notes gone whenever the lines and hooks appeared but with no response. Eventually, after a series of misunderstandings and disagreements with her family, I decided to move out of my girlfriend's house and moved in with a couple friends into their apartment until my parents' new house could be completed. The very last time I had an encounter with the lines/hooks, I came home from work to find them strewn about the living room. Stuff was knocked over, and a few things broken, but nothing was taken. My friend, his girlfriend, and their baby were all gone at the time, so no one was home when this happened, save for his cats, which were absolutely spooked and wouldn't come out from under his bed for hours. I still don't know what this person wanted, why they were stalking me in the first place, or what the fishing lines and hooks meant. No one I know is huge into fishing, and I specifically go out of my way not to make enemies or cross people, even purposefully giving people more than I take from them so that I don't seem like I'm out for myself. I really don't know if it was someone I know or a stranger really good at covering their tracks and freaking people out. All I know is that I will have anxiety over this for the rest of my life, and I routinely stay up until 4 or 5 in the morning because in addition to several other traumatizing experiences, this has made every bump in the night a potential threat to me. It's been almost 9 months since I've seen anything more from this person, but instead of feeling better, I feel more uneasy that someone followed me through that many changes in my life and didn't do anything further than breaking into my work and my friend's house, but that any time they could because no safety measures seemed able to deter them. Story 32. Men scheming and stalking in the park. This incident happened last week. I just finished up my summer classes, so I now have time to share this with you guys. Quick reference, I'm a 5 feet 2 inches 105 pounds female. I was visiting my parents and decided to go down to the park by their house to write poetry. I love writing poetry at the gazebo in that park because it's surrounded by a beautiful garden that inspires my writing. The park is behind their house, but you have to walk past 2 baseball fields and a stretch of grass to get to the gazebo, relevant later. When I got to the park and sat in the gazebo, there were a bunch of people that seemed to be having a party of some sort over by the shelter and picnic benches. After sitting there writing for about 20 minutes, a guy wearing a neon yellow shirt and talking on the phone walks over towards me. I thought this was a bit strange because this was a bit away from the rest of the crowd and the gazebo is tucked away behind a garden. The park is big enough that to come over specifically in my direction was a little strange. He was speaking Spanish and I know some Spanish, but I only heard bits and pieces of what he was saying because it's hard for me to keep up with a native speaker. Whenever I speak Spanish with someone, I usually have to ask them to slow down a little, so naturally, I didn't catch all of what he was saying. But he kept saying, "Blonde girl. My hair is bleached blonde, but so are millions of other girls, so I didn't read too much into it." I also heard, "When will you be here?" Throughout the conversation he kept glancing over at me, but after a few minutes, he went back by the party. A couple minutes later, another guy walks over by me in the same spot as the last guy. He was also on the phone speaking Spanish. Like the previous guy, I only caught bits and pieces of what he was saying. But he also kept saying, "Blonde girl." This raised some red flags, but neither of these guys looked frightening. They were both very handsome and clean cut, so they didn't send off any creeper vibes. After a couple minutes, he also went back to the party. About 30 minutes went by and I noticed the party was clearing out. At this point, I was the only one left in the park. I had to go to the bathroom, so I got up and started walking towards the restrooms. I saw a rusty dark blue truck sitting on the entrance/exit of the park. It was just sitting there idling, so I thought it was weird that it was not going anywhere. As I got closer, it pulled away and turned right. After that, I didn't think anything of it. I went to the bathroom and headed back to the gazebo to continue writing. A bit later, I lifted up my neck up to stretch it because it was feeling stiff. When I looked up, I saw the same rusty blue truck sitting in the parking lot in the space that was closest to my location, but was facing the far exit, so I only saw the passenger side of the truck. At this point, it wasn't dark out, but the sun already began to set. From where I was, they were close enough that I could tell there were a few men sitting in the truck. The passenger side window was down and the guy in the passenger seat was looking in my direction. And he was wearing a neon yellow shirt. I looked closer and noticed it was the same guy who was talking on the phone, who kept saying, "Blonde girl," and asking, "When will you be here?" I picked up my notebook and started walking quickly back on the stretch of grass past the baseball fields that leads to my parents' house. As soon as I started to walk away, the truck started driving too. It looked as if it was going towards the far exit, but as I kept walking, it turned around to go towards the other exit where they were at idling earlier. From where I was, I could get a full view of it, so they certainly had a full view of me as well. I started to walk faster, and they started driving faster as well. They turned left, which was the direction I was walking. We were parallel, with maybe about 50 feet of grass between them and me, so they wouldn't have been able to get to me unless they got out on foot. The speed limit on that road is 40 miles per hour, but they had to have been going about 20. The guy in the driver's side kept peeking his head out and staring at me, so I was afraid that they were going to park the truck and get out on foot. They finally went under an overpass around a curve and were no longer visible. Story 33. My run-in with the Mexican cartel. So as a bit of background, I live about 20 minutes from the Mexican border leading into a city in Mexico called Reynosa. It isn't odd to just hop into your vehicle and drive into Mexico for a bit of shopping and authentic Mexican food where I'm from. Obviously, with things getting as bad as they've been, gang violence, and this whole Trump border wall talk, that's changed quite a bit, but pre-2010 things weren't as bad. Anyways, I have family in Reynosa, so we'd periodically head on over for a visit from time to time. This was an all-day thing because if there's one thing Hispanics and Mexicans like to do, it's talk for hours on end. We'd arrive at around 10 a.m. and typically begin the drive back home at midnight. This particular day, I want to say in the summer of '09, was like any other day. We visited family and did some shopping. At around 11:30 p.m. my mom gets a call from one of her cousins that a niece we had missed during our visit had gotten home. So wanting to see her before we left, we headed back over. Again, being as talkative as we are, the conversation stretched deep into the night. At around 2 in the morning I finally get frustrated and in an effort to get my mom to get the hint I want to leave, grab my younger brother and 2 sisters and lead them to our car, turn it on for the AC and lock the doors. Obviously everyone is exhausted, so we all knock out. I'm suddenly awakened by a blinding light. It's legitimately startling, and as I try to adjust to the light I catch a glimpse of my mom right in front of our car. She was standing right by my cousin and both had incredibly concerned looks on their face. I finally regain my eyesight and realize the light is coming from behind me. I turn around to find a massive lifted Ford F-250, black paint job, and window tint so dark you couldn't tell who was inside. I turn back to my mother and notice she now has tears in her eyes, and it almost seems like she's pleading with the truck. It begins to flicker its high beams, filling our Nissan Altima with blinding light, then immediately thrusting it back into darkness. The realization of what's going on begins to dawn on me. The Mexican cartel known as the Zetas were notorious for kidnapping and murders throughout Reynosa and the surrounding cities, and blacked-out vehicles seemed to be their choice of transportation. The truck begins to rev its engines, almost like it's taunting my mother, daring her to move. I begin to reach for the handle to the door to go and comfort my mom and assess the situation. My mom immediately notices and mouths for me to stay put. I oblige, but the panic and helplessness of the situation begin to overwhelm me as I begin to fear for my family's life. I will always remember what happened next. My mother suddenly sprinted for the driver's door. The second she moved, I unlocked the car and heard the truck begin to shift into gear behind me. My mom basically tears the door from its hinges open and flies in, flooring the gas pedal before the door is even fully closed. We haul ass down the bumpy unpaved road with the truck not far behind. I look at my mom and tears are just pouring from her face. She's crying out to God for help as we're reaching speeds well over 80 miles per hour in a residential area. My mom, obviously filled with adrenaline and the motherly instinct to protect her children, drives like I've never seen her drive before. With the truck still in hot pursuit, my mom tells me to buckle up. I turn back to the truck one last time to see the windows rolled down and men peering out, possibly recording or taking photos of the back of my mom's vehicle. My mom avoided traffic, nearly wrecking twice, but was determined to not stop until we reached the U.S. border. About 5 miles away from the checkpoint, the truck stopped following us. We were able to breathe again. My mom just let everything out and broke down, finally waking up the kids, blissfully ignorant to what had just occurred. We hit a red light about a mile away from the checkpoint when another 2 blacked-out trucks pulled up to the left and right of our vehicle. I'll always remember looking up to the truck on my right and seeing a man, about 26 years old, smiling at me as they began flickering their lights the same way the first truck had. My mom didn't even wait for a green. She just floored it until we were on U.S. soil. We reported the incident to the U.S. Border Patrol, who took statements from us all but really couldn't do much else. We didn't go back to Mexico until 2014 when one of my aunts passed away. We still go back to Mexico to this day, but it's so damn unsafe I hate it. Helicopters patrolling the air so low to the ground you can see the officers' fingers on the triggers of their onboard turrets. Anyways, Mexican cartel, Let's not meet. Story 34. My hiccups got me strangled. In case you are wondering, I am a female in my 20s, 5 feet 2 inches and about 100 pounds. This event happened recently while I was at work. It had been a busy day at my small office following a 4-day holiday weekend. Things had slightly settled down by 4 p.m. when a client stopped by to pick up some paperwork. I have known this guy for over 3 years. The extent of our relationship is professional small talk. Nate is a big burly dude with a shaved head and a long beard. In all the time that I have known him, we have not had any major issues. While I'm not sure if this is relevant, I do feel that I should point out that Nate had been acting rather odd towards me for the past year. Little things, but enough for me to take notice. If I answered the phone when he would call, he wouldn't say anything and just hung up. He'd be super friendly with my coworkers but completely ignore me. It all began about a year prior when my boss informed him that I'm a fellow scuba diver. After discovering this information, Nate repeatedly asked me to be his dive buddy, while assuring me that he knew all of the best spots and where to find secret shipwrecks. He wrote his number on a piece of paper and asked me to call him, but I never did. When he began to act strangely towards me, I had just assumed he was offended that I didn't want to go out with him. So on to the reason why this story ever happened. I have had chronic hiccups for the past 15 years. They literally just started out of nowhere one day and have never stopped. Usually I only get 1 or 2 small ones throughout the day, which my friends/family lovingly refer to as hourly hiccups. However, maybe once or twice a month, I get a bout which can last hours. I have seen a doctor about this, yet it still remains a mystery. This was one of those days where I could not stop hiccuping. I was in my office while Nate stayed in the main lobby area where my boss assisted him. About 5 minutes into their conversation, he yelled, "I know the cure for your hiccups," to which I chuckled. Believe me, I have tried every old wives' tale and trick known to man. What I have learned in over a decade is that the only thing that actually works is time. I continued working in my office, trying to stifle my hiccups and not be too loud. After 3 years of working here, all of my coworkers knew about my problem and barely even notice anymore. About 45 minutes go by and they still have not stopped. At this point I am getting fed up. Anyone who has had hiccups for a lengthy amount of time knows that eventually your abdominal muscles get sore and you start to feel nauseous. So when Nate said again, "I know how to cure your hiccups," I was desperate for any relief. I walked out of my office and approached him. "What's your secret?" I asked, to which he simply replied, "You'll see." Figuring it was the usual method to frighten me, I firmly informed him that I did not want to be scared. I'm just one of those people who hates getting startled suddenly. Nate walks past me and says nothing, so I figured his original plan to spook me had been sabotaged. I was just about to turn around and get back to work when he grabbed me from behind. Suddenly he threw me into a choker hold while forcefully covering my mouth and nose with his hand. Immediately panic sets in and I struggle to free myself, but his grip only gets tighter and more intense. It felt like I was being coiled by a boa constrictor. No matter how hard I tried to get him off me, I could not compete with his body weight and strength. I began to punch and kick him, but he only seemed to get angrier. My vision started to turn black and I became incredibly tired and dizzy. I could feel myself about to pass out. All I wanted was to breathe. How could this be happening? I was about to be murdered at my fucking workplace while my colleagues were just one room over the entire time. Although this moment felt like a lifetime, it probably only lasted about 2 minutes. I tried to scream and make noise, but my mouth was covered too tightly. The taste of his hand filled my mouth, and I felt like I was going to be sick. Right as I was drifting out of consciousness, I heard someone yell, "Hey, get off her! Let her go!" My boss had previously been making a phone call and his office had just entered the lobby. He approached Nate and dragged him off of me. After the ambush, Nate released me from his grip and began to walk towards the exit nonchalantly. While I stumbled and gasped for air, Nate turned to face me before he left. With a sick and twisted smile, he told me, That got rid of your hiccups." He proceeded to leave while I fought back the tears that were welling. I didn't want him to think he had won somehow. Once he was gone, my boss asked me if I was okay. I only nodded out of embarrassment that I'd start crying if I attempted to answer. As I made my way back to my office, my brain tried to comprehend what the fuck had just transpired in the past 3 minutes. Nothing else was mentioned after Nate left. I wore a collared shirt the next day to hide the bruises that covered neck, of which I did take photos. God forbid I ever need to use them in the future. I'm sure Nate would say he was just kidding, but the way he drew pleasure from my pain and suffering does not lead me to believe this. My boyfriend wanted me to press assault charges, but honestly I didn't see the point. Firstly, the police in my area tend to do nothing in these types of situations, and the most disturbing part of all, my boss backed Nate up. He has known him for almost 20 years and pretty much told me that I asked him to do it. What hurts the most is that he doesn't really seem to care about my safety or well-being. I fear that it is only a matter of time before I see Nate again because he is still a client. Since I am not the business owner, I cannot prevent him from returning. In fact, events like this happening at my workplace are the reason why I am currently looking for a new job. Not to mention I often work by myself, and the office is connected to a psychiatric facility with sometimes problematic patients. Hopefully when Nate does come back I will no longer be employed there. I truly hope we never meet again. Story 35. Sometimes you should just ignore curiosity. Just some basic info about myself, as I appreciate when others do the same. Male, 11 at the time of the incident, Australia. It was around 2 p.m. on a Sunday, and my brother, 13 years old, had a friend, male, 13 years old, over at our house just to hang out as kids do. Our parents had been away for the weekend and were expected back late afternoon. Meanwhile, our grandma was looking after us. Fairly standard for kids at that age. We were all into BMXs and scooters, etc. My brother and his friend decided that they wanted to go and build their own jump for the BMXs, and the easiest way to do this was the classic dirt/mud jump. My brother and his friend invited me along, so we grabbed a shovel and the BMXs and headed off after letting our grandma know where we were going. Our parents would have let us do the same just as some extra info. We weren't taking advantage of our grandma or anything, lol. We live on a street, well, Crescent to be exact, that backs onto some bushland with a few cleared out paths. We rode/ran about 2 km, about a 1.2 miles, through the bush to get to an openish area next to this dirty, medium-sized river. My brother started to shovel some dirt/mud to start making the jump. The friend and I left our bikes sitting a couple of meters away from the river's edge where it was level with the water itself. This was just so they were out of the way. As we were doing this, we saw this rope/string sort of thing sitting at the edge of the river and leading into the water. We started to pull at it thinking it was just a loose rope, but there was definitely something on the end of it. So we keep pulling and pulling until eventually we see what is at the end of it. A crab pot. Duh, sorry, not a dead body. Once we realize it's just a crab pot, we both pick it back up to throw it back in. As we are doing this, a man comes from out of the path we came through initially. I can't remember too much of what he looked like since it was quite a while ago, but I do remember he was Maori. With old-looking clothes, t-shirts/shorts, no shoes, and holding a machete, which in retrospect, he had to assist him with the crab fishing. We hoped that's all he would use it for. The friend and I were still standing at the river's edge while my brother was the same distance away from the man, around 20 m, except across from us in the open, dirt area. He started yelling and screaming at the friend and I. "What are you doing with my crab pot? Who do you think you are?" My brother and his friend didn't say a word, probably thought it was better not to, or were just that scared. But as I was a bit younger and probably more naive, as I was shaking like crazy, I tried to reason with him. "Sorry, we just saw the rope in the water and didn't realize, sorry. At this point he was basically just yelling profanity at us. To try and give him some understanding of the situation, I said, "We were just trying to throw it back in the river, sorry. To which he replied with the words that scared the living shit out of me. "How would you like it if I threw you in the river like you did with my crab pot, huh?" He then started walking over to us. This is when flight kicked in and we knew we had to get out of there. We thought he was walking towards us, so we ran to the side trying to keep the same distance away from him. He ended up walking towards our 2 bikes that were sitting near the river. He picked up one of the bikes and looked at us and said, "How would you like it if this were you?" He then threw the bike as far as he could into the river. As he started to pick up the second bike, we took our chance and legged it, my brother taking his bike as he left it near the clearing. He got on and started riding as me and the friend ran beside him. We heard a second splash of the man throwing the other bike into the river, but we weren't looking back at all. Eventually my brother let me ride the bike as I was younger, and it would be easier for me. I was hysterical, literally crying the entire way. Once we had made some distance, we started to look back to make sure he wasn't following us. We didn't see him, although this definitely didn't make us go any slower. Eventually we made it back home. My parents had just gotten home from their weekend trip around 5 minutes before we ran inside. I'm not sure how my parents knew something was wrong. Maybe it was the fact I was crying profusely mixed with the screaming and yelling almost gibberish as I was trying to explain everything that happened in one sentence. We eventually explain what happened, so my dad calls the cops and they arrive around 1 hour later, as it wasn't an immediate danger and they must have been busy. My brother and friend were just sitting on the couch talking to each other while my mom comforted me. I only really heard all these next details a couple years later when I asked my parents about it. Apparently, while waiting for the cops to arrive, my dad had gotten a crowbar and a small knife and also called 2 of his mates who arrived shortly after. They actually went into the bush looking for the guy. They didn't end up finding him though. When the cops arrived, my dad took them to the location and they actually ended up finding the man, as well as his wife and child. The roughly 5-year-old child was apparently sitting with the mom, playing with a kitchen knife. The cops spoke to the man about the situation and ended up taking him into the station. We never received an update of what happened to him. I also spoke to my mom about what happened, and she said that she had never seen my dad that angry before in her entire life. She said that he was in the rage/protective mode where murder isn't out of the question. She didn't have time to reason with him before he left to go searching. She doesn't want to think about what he would have done to that man if they ended up finding him without the cops there, and was glad they didn't find him. A couple days later we actually went back and ended up salvaging the 2 bikes from the river. That was not a fun process, very dirty and lots of garbage in that river. Could barely see your own hand with goggles on. Story 36. Creep at Sam Houston. So I live in Louisiana. I stay with my mom sometimes at this park she work camps at to take care of my little sister, and it's a pretty nice place. A few days ago I walked my ass to the swings, because I love the swings. Who doesn't love the swings? Now the swings are on a stretch of land between a road and a river, and on the side of the road closest to the stretch of land is parking spaces that go on for a good 100 yards. An hour into my swing time, this white van pulls into a space a bit left of where I'm facing. Really douchey hipster type walks out, and I don't pay much attention to him. He walks to the stretch of land right of me. I don't know how much time passed before I saw him again, but eventually he was walking slowly back towards his van, and this time I decide to look at him. He's messing on his phone with one hand, and with the other he's fucking masturbating. In a public park. I'm staring at this douchebag for a minute and a half, and then he notices and stares me straight in the eyes, still jerkin', and all I can say is, "Really?" He then smirks and then, still jerkin', walks to his van and drives away. I couldn't even move for 10 minutes because of this smug asshole's utter confidence in committing what I've learned to be sexual assault. Yes, I did call the cops.